Good evening. This is Father Joseph Swaden. This is NFU News and Apologetics, and we're here back again. Finally, we weren't here last week, so we will be talking a little bit about that. Not sure if not sure if His Grace is going to make it in today, but Malika hopefully will. But if not, that's it's probably going to be a little short, but we are still doing Q&As, of course. So anyone who wants to call in, you're free to use the link in blue, and we'll have a discussion. Whether it's questions, comments, you want to tell me I'm an awful person, that's fine. Whatever you choose, just use the link in blue and call in. We weren't here last week. Well, praise God, I had to do a baptism. Baptism for a family. It was actually 7 baptisms. And I had to travel out. So I had been driving. I drove from Pennsylvania to Kentucky. And it was nice to actually fulfill, kind of a promise I made here publicly, which was that, I said if I was ever a priest and people needed a baptism, that I would see what I can do to make that happen. And I got to do that. And I'm grateful to God for it. It was a wonderful experience, a little taxing mentally, but overall, that was my first baptisms. So anyway, that was basically the reason I didn't make it home until Monday. I wasn't doing a show from a hotel room. I was exhausted. So there was a lot of driving involved. I got some pictures of the country. Went through Pennsylvania, went through Ohio, went through Kentucky. So it was kind of crazy. It was a great trip, and thank God. Overall, I'm kind of happy with that and how that went, and I'm grateful to God that a family was added to the church. We did the marriage. It was wonderful. Everything was great. If I seem cagey about information, it's because families do often request their privacy, and so I did ask about that, and that's how I'm keeping that. So in any case, but it was a learning experience. It really was a learning experience for me. And so basically, it was a good experience overall. And but there was no way I was going to do a show. Hopefully, we will be keeping the schedule fairly regular from here on in. I will say that because I'm still trying to just keep everything together, otherwise, I may have to scale back on kind of working it full time. But at the same time, I am still going to be able to do these weekly shows, and hopefully get around to doing clips, which I have not been doing, and I really need to get better at doing. But in any case, again, this is open. It's an open live Q&A. Anyone wants to come through, they can. And good evening to everyone who's coming in and has they want to have a discussion. So the floor is kind of open. Outside of that, I'm sure a few of you at least, or a good number of you, know about the debate that I had with the vegan on the Crucible channel on Wednesday or Thursday. Everything's just a blur to me now. Thursday or Friday. It's one of these days, and yeah. So I'm I'm pretty. That was pretty much that was kind of got pumped for that, and there was a interesting choice of topic, but sometimes these things happen. So hey, if it falls in your lap, I'm willing to do it. I'm still have the open debate challenge. We started that last week for the last episode for the new year, and frankly, it's still open for anyone who's a papal apologist, a Protestant apologist. Really, anyone can call in and state their positions. I see we have a caller in. We've got Wazna. Hold on one moment. How's it going?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Should I use your name or your handle? What do you prefer?
I mean, you can use either. It doesn't matter. I go by either Theodore or obviously online name out of the places is Wazna.
No problem. Now I know you had a question. You mentioned it on the forum. I'm hearing echo though. On my end here.
Yeah. So my question is Here, let me pull up the quote from Saint Maximus the Confessor real quick.
Okay.
So this was a question that pops up in my head every now and then. I think I do have an answer in clarity, but I kind of want to see if you can answer this for the audience. And I'm sure you've answered it on your various streams. Like in the life of Saint Maximus the Confessor, when he says, "The church is that which maintains the true and saving confession of faith."
Okay.
What is the what would you say that if someone were to ask you from a World Orthodox side what he means by that, and like what is within the totality of the saving confession of faith?
Well, I think that, in that particular case, the heresy in question was monothelitism. But in terms of what the church is, what the church comprised at the time, St. Maximus was working with Rome, a few Eastern bishops, not the rest of the imperial hierarchy, and he didn't recognize them. So that was
So, for instance, if you say the church is that which maintains the saving confession of faith, would you say that, Father, that is everything that has been passed down and affirmed in the 7 ecumenical councils, including all the traditions within that too?
Right, and this is keep in mind that happened before the 6th and 7th council.
Yeah,
but it would be the totality of the faith as preserved.
And so then, what would you say a good apologetic to do with like those who are inquiring into true orthodoxy from World Orthodoxy would be to like demonstrate how the true Orthodox confession of faith differs from that of the World Orthodox confession of faith, and then what are various ways that you can go about that?
The way I would put, if we could kill the feedback though, like maybe, what I would say is this: the true Orthodox in every century where heresy takes place are the ones that retain the saving confession of faith, as opposed to those who have innovated. So in this case, it wouldn't be like I wouldn't go into a long thing on monothelitism when talking about that, because monothelitism is almost, with the exception of some pockets in academia, is largely dead in our age. But the point is, the real heresy at this time is ecumenism, it's modernism, it's Sergianism, and I think that those are the ones we need to focus on, because that's what's really affecting us today. And modernism is everywhere; it's crazy. But I think that that's important to demonstrate the innovations if you're trying to make an argument or a coherent argument as to why we do what we do. And this is one thing that is very important to stress, again, is the concept of hierarchy. A lot of the time, there's a misconception that we're kind of just operating on our own when we usually have either a parish life or we're, under a bishop, etc. And that needs to be stressed. So it's clear that, fundamentally there isn't that much of a massive change. And I think that that's something that, I think is done very effectively to varying degrees by, different Orthodox groups all over the country and all over the world.
Cool. Thank you, Father. That was basically it. So
okay, great. Yep. No problem. So I'll just put you in the back there until, if I've got you there. If you have another question, let me know in the inside comments. But anyone can call in. Just, again, use the link in blue up top. And so it was a pretty, I think, a straightforward question. If there are any other questions or comments, you can put them in the comment bar. You don't have to call in who you don't want, but you are welcome to if you do. I think that touches, I think that hits the nail on the head with a number of different things. I noticed that in the NFTU Discord, there was some talk about the anathema against ecumenism of 1980, the 1980, I want to say 1983, and then how it was kind of viewed at the time in the Russian church abroad, and basically, unfortunately, what also led to the Hakna system in 1986. So they, that these things kind of are relevant to our era. I realize that I'm slowly becoming an older person, and 1985 and 1986 are not relevant to, they are relevant, but they're not directly relevant or informing the minds of people today, because I've been talking about this for 20 years. And frankly, that is an entire lifetime for many people. So the point is that, yeah, there's now more of a historical basis as we continue to review history, as we continue to grow and continue to see how things play out. We've seen positives and we've seen a lot of negatives. Unfortunately, until things straighten themselves out, we just have to keep doing what we do, and that's basically the rule of life, I guess. Let's see here. As I mentioned, I have left a link for Vishminak, but I don't see that he's seen it yet. And let me just see here. Question here: are there any historical instances of churches solely relying on the confession of faith? I'm not sure what that means. I mean, the Orthodox churches should always rely on the confession of faith. You may want to clarify that a little bit more. But yeah, the historical instances, if you're saying like in the case of like St. Maximus and the Monophyite heresy, that occurred during the Arian heresy. Those were usually the reasons that prompted the ecumenical councils to begin with, and even the pan-Orthodox synods afterwards. Remember that even, say, for example, the Palamite councils were, dealing with the controversy created by Barlaam the Calabrian. So, it's absolutely a valid question. But in terms of the phrasing, I'm just wondering if I'm actually answering it or if I'm missing something. So, if you want to add further clarification to the question, feel free. Did you get a chance to look into what Subdeacon Nectarios is releasing regarding his book on the Greek True Orthodox? I have not. I've heard of some of the stuff that he is doing. I heard they're re-releasing the calendar question by Father Basil Sakas, which was a fantastic text. And I think that, basically, from what I understand, he's just doing minor editing on it before they re-release it. And so, yeah, definitely, I think it's going to be a worthwhile resource. I just find it interesting to see that book is being reprinted, and there's so many more books that need to be. So that's a very good one. Let me see here. Okay. Yeah, like what happened with St. Maximus. No, it's fine. That's why I figured that's what you were kind of asking. And that makes sense. But yeah, this happened even in cases like, as I mentioned, in the case of Nestorius, that one has been used. You know what? That gives me an idea. Let me see here, because what I'd like to do, and let me see if I'm just going to check to see how long this is. Hold on. I'm going to quickly take a look here. True Orthodox. All right, so I've got a subject here that I can do. This is a 20-minute video, because people have asked me about this video, which we've answered. We answered in a really long kind of, our typical 2 to 3 hour way. But people want to see if we can address the questions that were asked in this original video here. So I am going to just put it on the screen, and we're gonna do a live kind of a review of the video, just for the heck of it, and then I can chop it out and I can make it a clip. Give me a moment, and so let me see if I can just get that on the screen. And okay, so I'm gonna pause it when I feel like there's stuff that needs to be discussed, and so let's go.
Greetings, everyone. David the Real Midwife here. And 2 days ago, I had a poll on Twitter where I asked my followers what they wanted to see next, what they wanted me to cover, and there are like 4 options, and half of them wanted me to cover the true Orthodox problem. And so here we are. And this so-called true Orthodox is no doubt a prevalent issue in our church, especially because of the new wave of catechumens and people inquiring to the Orthodox faith. Many of these people that come to the faith come here because of its ancient roots, and they don't really know it fully. And so when they hear the polemics of the so-called true Orthodox, some of them end up being seduced, and then they end up departing from the true faith.
I'm going to stop right there because I do want to enter this. The polemics he's talking about are literally cataloging ecumenical, Sergianistic abuses, modernist abuses, the stuff that people actually didn't want and why they came to Orthodoxy to begin with. You know, Sergianism, modernism, ecumenism. This is the stuff that we're trying to run away from in coming to Orthodoxy. But that's our polemic. That's our big attack on World Orthodoxy, is pointing out that they're being hypocrites. So let's continue.
And so this video is going to cover the objections of the so-called true Orthodox, debunk the erroneous claims that go contrary to the ancient faith. And so the first thing we need to understand is what even is this so-called true Orthodoxy. Well, they're a collection of uncanonical groups. Some of their groups include Genuine Orthodox Church. Some of them call themselves Old Calendarists. And just to clarify for some people that don't know the calendar issue, when I say Old Calendarist, I do not mean churches that are in the old calendar. Many old calendar churches are in communion with churches that are in the new calendar, right?
Okay, so here's a first case of slipping in some straight up deceit. He kind of puts this in as they're a collection of uncanonical groups. Well, we're going to get to that, such as the Genuine Orthodox Church. That's valid. Old Calendarists. That's not actually what we called ourselves. That's what they called us. Old Believers, which is a 300-year-old schism, some of which have people who don't even believe in an episcopate anymore and have nothing to do with us, but he just threw that in there anyway. So we'll continue on, and we'll let him talk a little more.
But old calendarists are those that are in the old calendar, and they reject all new calendar churches and those that are in communion with new calendar churches.
Stopping here. Once again, I need to kind of flash everyone back to the past, because this is where the kind of deception kind of begins. And what I'm referring to is, at that time, there was only the Church of Constantinople, the Church of Finland, and the Church of Greece in 1924 who were on the new calendar. Everyone else was actually on the church calendar. So this idea that like everyone went to the new calendar, the old calendar is protest, that's all a lie. The Serbians were willing to help the Genuine Orthodox of Greece. The Russians had their own issues, as you know, and the main issue wasn't Sergianism. The main issue was being murdered. And so the persecutions against the true Orthodox in Greece and in Russia are well known. You all know them, I'm sure. If not, there are videos that we have done referring to them. They're well documented. The idea that the entire church had suddenly become magically new calendar is just a flat out lie, and that's not what happened. So 1920s to 1930s, most people actually supported the true Orthodox, not the innovators.
And there are also groups like the Old Believers that go far back to the 17th century, but most of the true Orthodox that we are concerned with are going to be the modern ones. Some of our objections are going to apply to the Old Believers as well, but this video is going to be focusing.
He doesn't know what we are, so he just lumped us in with Old Believers, but that's fine.
On the more modern so-called true Orthodoxy. And true Orthodoxy, which from now on I will call fake Orthodox from now, in the modern sense start to appear during the.
And then they wonder why, if we say something like we don't recognize your sacraments, why they would get mad.
1920s and 1930s, both in Greece and Russia. When the tragic Pan-Orthodox Congress of Constantinople introduced the new calendar, there was an old calendarist movement. At first,
one thing to note, he's actually, even though he calls it a tragic council, it's a council he tragically recognizes.
First, it was legitimate. It wasn't a schism, but then a couple years later, 3 bishops schismed from the church, and then the old calendars movement really started to begin.
That's not actually true. It actually was 11 years, not a couple of years, during which the state church heavily persecuted those on the traditional calendar, closed down churches, arrested people, killed people. Monks from Mount Athos would come and serve all over the nation, assisting people to use, the traditional form, to use their traditional calendar, etc. So this idea that it was just like a bunch of people who were just like sitting around is a lie. It's a lie. There were mass arrests. There were mass protests. The entire thing is just based. He's reducing it to an academic dispute and threw in the old believers for absolutely no reason. But in any case, so we go on.
In Greece. And for Russian churches, especially for those that were abroad, the split happened because of Sergianism. And what Sergianism is when Patriarch Sergius.
He's actually wrong on that too. There were actually true Orthodox before that. They were the ones that were being persecuted by the state heavily. The Living Church was the original Soviet-sponsored church and sent representatives to that tragic council that David tragically recognizes. And they attempted to impose the new calendar, and it failed miserably. The True Orthodox wanted nothing to do with the Living Church. But then we get to Patriarch Sergius after when he was metropolitan. He declared in 1927 that he would be completely subservient to the Soviet state, which that declaration led to a full-on schism where the Orthodox in Russia, who did not want to be part of what would be eventually termed the Red Church, would separate from communion. And there were varying degrees of this, but they separated in communion before the making of Patriarch Sergius in 1943, but the declaration in 1927.
In 1927 told the Russian Orthodox faithful to submit to the Soviet Union. Many Russian churches abroad said, yeah, this ain't it, and they just left and schismed from the church.
No, they didn't say, yeah, this ain't it. They said they refused to recognize the Soviet power, at which point the Soviet power attempted to use the force of law in places like the United States and in Europe to take away churches abroad. This unfortunately also led to the Evlogian Schism. It led to the formation, effectively, of the American Metropolia, which would become the OCA after it kind of bowed the knee to the Moscow Patriarchate in 1970. So, one thing that we have to notice here, and I hate to say it's kind of a deceitful tack, is to misrepresent history for what it is. The heroic lives of the new martyrs were virtually buried by the Soviets until the 2000 Council. So it's something to keep in mind that until 2000, once again, all those new martyrs recognized by ROKOR and recognized within Russia among the true Orthodox were not recognized by Moscow.
And so a lot of them came back to the Russian church. Some of them came back.
He means Moscow.
To Orthodoxy. But there are still some churches that haven't come back. And today, the main issue.
This is also kind of this again implies that we left somewhere. We didn't leave. People began leaving under, funding from different groups like the CIA to switch to the new calendar. What had happened ultimately was a forced form of isolation while modernism and ecumenism were taking hold in the churches that we now refer to as World Orthodoxy, a term that was again invented by Father John Meyendorff in 1971, as Father Seraphim Rosas noted.
Whether it's a Greek old calendarist or a Russian schismatic, is ecumenism. They claim that we have various people in high positions, various hierarchs that are ecumenist. And this is the ultimate main point the fake Orthodox would try to drive home.
He's still wrong on that. If you think that the true Orthodox in Russia have forgotten the experience of the Soviet Union, the apostasy of Sergius, or anything else like that, they haven't. So it's still an issue to them, and it's still an issue to the rest of us as well. Unfortunately, I like to, and I say this often, that the COVID pandemic ultimately was a global Sergianism test. And a lot of people failed, and some people did a makeup. And unfortunately, the state proved that, it was proven that a world kind of force to see if the churches would bow down did become real. And we're seeing that live. And I think that was a big threshing floor for a lot of people and what caused them to look more into true Orthodoxy to begin with.
And the problem here with this polemic is that it's not even wrong. When they say that there's a problem in the Orthodox Church in regards to ecumenism, they're actually 100% correct. There is indeed.
Yeah, I don't think I need to leave a comment, but I really, really want to stress that what he just said, if we can just repeat that, because I want to repeat it, because I think I'm actually gonna note it and timestamp
When they
it.
say that there's a problem in the Orthodox Church in regards to ecumenism, they're actually 100% correct. There is indeed a problem in the Orthodox Church, but the main issue here is, does it warrant a schism? Does it mean that we should schism from the true church? Does it mean we should set up parallel authorities? This is the main argument that I will go with in this video.
Yeah, well, those parallel authorities had already formed. There's no way around that. And the canons require people to go and follow true bishops. And more importantly, once they have true bishops, they're supposed to stay with those true bishops in the exact same way they were before there was a controversy. So I'm curious to see where he goes down this road. I haven't seen this video in a couple of years, so I guess we're watching it together.
So whether it is implicit or explicit, there's going to be two arguments coming from the fake Orthodox. And the first argument is going to be that breaking certain canons automatically excommunicates you and you lose grace. And the second argument is that we're obligated to sever communion with those that break canons.
Well, yeah. The idea of somebody having no grace comes from the fact that they're committing to heresy. Heretics do not have grace. That is something that is pretty well established in the canonical tradition. Breaking communion with heretics, I've pretty much, I think by now we have introduced Canon 15 of the First Second Synod to the world in pretty good fashion and have introduced people to the rudder, which literally says breaking communion with heretics is obligatory.
And before I move on, it will be good to understand that this is actually very similar to a heresy that happened centuries ago. This is very similar to Donatism.
Wait,
Donatism was very similar,
Donatism? Was it Donatism?
except it said that clergy that commit sins they have no grace. So if you commit a sin, then you are without grace or you lose grace.
For those of you who had watched my initial debate with Resident Sleeper on the Crucible channel, you may have noticed that I had this argument twice because people did not know what Donatism was. And one caller actually misrepresented and claimed that that Donatism was about breaking away from heretics, which is absolutely false. When confronted with this, they basically reacted with denial. Unfortunately, the truth is Donatism is about sin. It is not about heresy. We continue.
And as a matter of fact, I will say that Donatists are more consistent because Donatists don't stop at canons. Just stopping at canons and saying that's where you lose grace is kind of arbitrary. Whereas the Donatists take it to its full logical conclusion and say, well, sinning is breaking God's canons, and therefore a clergy should not be sinning at all. He should be perfect.
Okay, well, now we finally know the origin of the caller's ridiculous belief system. Apparently, Mr. Erhan believes that the Donatists were more consistent than following the rules and traditions in the Holy Canons and the rules and traditions of the Church. He believes, if we're going to do this, we may as well start believing in perfect clergy, even though there's no good reason for us to do that, because that's never really been a belief in the Orthodox Church. So, in other words, I think what they want is for us to be Donatists, even though they know we are not Donatists, but they don't want to admit that.
And so we will be arguing this. Is it true that you can be automatically excommunicated and lose grace the moment you transgress certain canons?
Not the issue. It's about falling into heresy. People transgress canons and go to confession all the time for them. And then they're confessed and they're forgiven. Accidents happen. Mistakes happen. Laziness happens. However, heresy is none of those things. Heresy is not simply breaking a canon. Heresy is abandoning the faith.
And this is what we're going to tackle. And church history proves that this is not the case and has never been the case. And here are some of the examples. The first example will be Saint Nicodemus the Hagiorite, and in his writings, he states, and I quote, "The canons command the council of living bishops to depose the priests," good so far, "or to excommunicate them, or to anathemize laymen who violate the canons. Yet if the council does not actually effect the deposition of the priests, or the excommunication, or the anathemization of laymen, these priests and laymen are neither actually deposed, nor excommunicated, nor anathemized. And need I remind you that Saint Nicodemus is also is considered a saint also in fake Orthodox churches. And
Okay, well, that's his first point. It's wrong, but that's his first point. His assumption here is that if there is no living synod of bishops, then nothing can be done. And he'd be right, except for one problem. There are and were living synods of bishops who were, in fact, excommunicating the New Calendarists in Greece after the New Calendarists excommunicated the true Orthodox. So ultimately, this argument is part of why you have to pretend there's no synods of bishops of true Orthodox. You have to pretend a couple of hundred true Orthodox bishops that are all over the world. They're not there. Because if they are there and they did the work they're supposed to, which is to say that if you are under the ecumenist or the sergianist, you're anathematized, the work's done. So this is not a proof. He's just trying to deny, again, that our synods exist.
And another example will be if you go back to the 5th century with the Nestorian crisis. St. Cyril's third letter to Nestorius, which is dogmatized in Ephesus 1, which contains the 12 anathemas against Nestorianism. And so the fake Orthodox, if the fake Orthodox lies were true, then what St. Cyril will address Nestorius will be in a complete different vein with how he's addressed. But let's see how St. Cyril addresses Nestorius. "To the most reverend and God-loving fellow ministers Nestorius, Cyril and Synod assembled in Alexandria of the Egyptian province, greeting in the Lord." So Nestorius, despite being a heretic, is still regarded as a fellow minister, as a colleague. But
This is a false argument in so many ways that it actually hurts my ears. The first problem is that St. Cyril did not react that way to Nestorius. He was busy telling priests and people who had fled Nestorius's heresy to continue saying prayers at home, to operate churches from home, and to get away from the heretics. David's entire argument relies on a greeting, which, by the way, was an invitation to the council, which was going to depose him. Nestorius did not answer the greeting, assembled kind of private security so he couldn't be taken out, and they anathematized him in absentia, and deposed him. Further, and if we look at the acts of the council, this is what's going to get you. Let me see. I'm gonna try to point that out. So give me just a moment, because this is going to be kind of funny. Because here's what he's saying. He's saying that this did not separate the Nestorians from the council. But now let's go look at what the rudder actually says, because this is going to surprise you. You see, I'm going to try to see if I can get to links here. I'm going to get to the it was convened against Nestorius. Okay, give me just a moment as I go through these. Hold on, give me a moment. I'm going to go through, if you don't mind, real quick. I'm just going to go through the actual canons in question, because we're talking about the Third Ecumenical Council. They greeted Nestorius to invite him in. He refused to show up. But now I'm going to actually show you what the canons of the Third Ecumenical Council say. And that's very, very important. And I'll tell you why. Because if we look, give me just a moment. Okay, window, the rudder, share. Okay, so let me switch this to single page because it makes it easier to read. That definitely not what I wanted to do. Okay, all right, so if we go to here, we look at Canon 1. Canon 1 basically is a warning that anyone who was absent from the synod is liable to excommunication, etc. We go to Canon 2. If any provincial bishops fail to attend or follow Nestorius into apostasy, then they are alienated from their rank and from holy orders. We go to Canon 3. If anyone in clergymen in the city or district have been removed from their titles by Nestorius and his party on account of their believing rightly, we have adjudged it right and just that they be restored to their own rank. We collectively bid the clergymen who agree in their beliefs with the Orthodox and the Ecumenical Synod not to submit in any way whatever to the bishops who have apostatized or deserted us. This is, by the way, as we go through this, this is actually the legal canonical basis for Canon 15 of the First Second Synod. It is precisely this case. So that's the deceit that is involved here. That's the deception we're dealing with, that they're actually trying to present what was actually a proof of the proper way to behave in Orthodoxy as though it isn't. If any of the clergymen should apostatize and dare, publicly or privately, to hold the beliefs of Nestorius or Celtius, the Holy Synod deemed it just and right that these men too should be deposed. So keep in mind what's happening here. The people who didn't follow Nestorius are being elevated. They're being recognized for their heroic stand against the heresy. And the people who followed the heresy or said, well, I guess it's okay. I guess he's the bishop because he's in the church, like what David's doing here, are condemned. So we go further. As for all those who have been condemned by the Holy Synod or by their own bishops for improper acts, and to whom Nestorius and those sharing his views of rank have sought or should seek to give back communion or rank uncanonically and in accordance with the indifference shown by Nestorius in all matters, we have deemed it right and just to show they remain without benefit and they be left nevertheless deposed. But wait, this is going to get even better, because here's the other thing that's not mentioned. Despite the fact that the Nestorian schism and the letter that David produced, the invitation to the council, and finally the conciliar actions that occurred, all of this occurred in the scope of 2 years. 2 years. No internet, no telephones, no high-speed mail, no express mail. 2 years. That's how long it took. So when people say, oh, well, we have to be patient, we have to wait. It's been 100 years, guys. 100 years. Let's get back to David's little video. We want to see if there's any more here. Yeah, okay, these are more people who ended up, because they sold out, so they ended up getting kicked out. Okay, and then more on the orthodoxy of, on the orthodoxy of St. Cyril and the Orthodox parties. Give me one moment while I switch to this, and we get back to the video.
Saint Cyril did this very thing, and I will remind you that he did this in the same letter where he gave the 12 chapters against Nestorius. There's also other parts of church history where worse offenders were still considered part of the church.
I want to stop this because this is in particular a very devilish and ecumenist argument that has come up very often, especially among new Orthodox Christians who are not familiar with the history of the church. This is one of the most evil and misleading arguments. This argument is basically but somebody else did something even more evil argument. Many evil things have happened in the history of the church. We're not supposed to use that as our standard. It's not supposed to be how evil we can become, how heretical we can become. But since that's the route David wants to go, let's keep it up.
Simony was a huge problem in the days of Saint Nicodemus. He called Simoniacs the biggest heretics against the Holy Spirit, and yet he still did not schism from the church. And
well, okay. First off, a Simoniac would be an individual. In many cases, those accusations were not always legitimate. It was a very common accusation, particularly under the Ottoman Empire. If this is his proof for not going to true bishops and sticking with people who recite the Filioque, who, baptize babies that have been purchased for gay marriages. If this is what his thing is, like, it's a church that was under subjection to the Ottomans, and unfortunately there were accusations of purchases of ordinations, which is a great sin. It is heretical, but I can't even compare these. These are willing people willing to destroy the church, not like these people that were suffering under the Ottoman yoke.
Also, the fake Orthodox churches still consider those clergy as part of the succession. There are also 3 hesychastic councils in the 14th century, and in the Tomos of 1349, it says that if you reject these councils, you are anathema. You shall be anathemized. Yet in Russia, especially during the time of Peter the Great Devil, they banned hesychasm. They banned these practices. They called these practices Greek innovations in Russia.
That's not true. The hesychast tradition was alive in Russia. St. Nicholas of Sora was one of its greatest representatives. He's trying to condemn the church under Peter the Great, even though no real great heresies had occurred. I can't believe this is a real argument, considering that all Orthodox, true Orthodox all over the world, whether in Greece, Russia, etc., we all accept these councils. So what he's really condemning isn't us. He's actually condemning the pre-Soviet, the pre-revolutionary church, which is par for the course if you're supporting Soviets. We continue.
And nothing happened to those that banned it. No one schismed from them. There was no schism from these clergy that banned it.
Well, I mean, there were schismatics. They were called the old believers, the ones you try to link up with us. Unfortunately, his knowledge of Russian history is pretty poor. I really don't appreciate the Peter the Great Devil comment. I think that's even worse than the fake Orthodox. I think we should pray for Orthodox kings, even ones that are failed, that didn't live up to the greatness of their office.
And on the topic of Peter the Great Devil, people talk about Sergianism, but 18th century Russia was proto-Sergianist. It
could not be proto-Sergianist because Russia at the time was officially an Orthodox country, not an atheistic one.
Hierarchs, many people in the church, noted that the Tsar, Peter the Great Devil, was the head of the church at that point, that he was the head of the Russian church.
The king is usually the head of the church in a country. He's the legal head. That's how it worked with the emperors too.
And again, fake Orthodox succession comes from these people, comes from this church as well.
Well, I'm glad that he admits that our succession comes from the Russian and Greek churches as they historically were, as opposed to modernizing heretics.
And you might say, if you're holding to fake Orthodoxy, you might say, well, it doesn't really matter. Okay, those are Sergians. Okay, I don't care about Sergians. For me, ecumenism is the main problem.
This implies that we would say that they're Sergians. That's a lie. He's trying to imply that we would switch arguments up when we wouldn't, because we're not actually afraid of confronting the history of the Russian church, especially whether before or after the Soviet period. Our interlocutor is. And that's, probably why he has to make sure that he tries to get us banned from platforms, because he wants to falsely malign the true Orthodox and the historical Orthodox in Greece and Russia, apparently.
Sorry, but ecumenism is not a new problem.
It kind of is. It's 100 years old. It's a new problem.
It goes far back. We already had ecumenism and this issue in 18th century Russia and Greece. In Russia, many clergy stated that heterodox sacraments were valid. In Mount Athos, which is the center of Orthodox spirituality, the monks allowed Roman Catholics to commune, and then they...
The history of this can be found in the book Eustathios Arganti by Callistus Ware. Those people were often punished on Mount Athos for doing that. The theology in Russia did depend occasionally on Latin sources and did rely on scholasticism. They also did have a looser form of perception, because the forms of baptism, etc., had not changed too much. They were also dealing with the Uniate problem, where you had people with virtually identical baptisms as the Orthodox who were suddenly under Rome wanting to come back. He's presenting very, very complicated time periods in the church as though it was just ecumenism. Haha, brush it off. That's evil. And I think that it really needs to stop. But unfortunately, we still have 10 more minutes of this.
Said that the Pope is the supreme pontiff of all the Christian world. And so I will remind you for the third time, fake Orthodox succession comes from these people. Yet these people,
Pre-revolutionary people who didn't actually officially ever say that the Pope was the head of the Christian world. But yeah, we do come from those people.
in their logic, should not even be called priests. They shouldn't even be part of the church. They're outside the church because they're heretics, right? And ultimately,
Keep in mind, he's saying that the pre-revolutionary Russian and Greek churches were heretics. Think that through.
this argument of automatic excommunication and losing grace for breaking canons comes from the heterodox notion that ecclesiastical grace is dependent upon the person holding that position alone. And this
No, that's actually the Orthodox position. That's why a bishop, when he's consecrated, takes an oath to preserve the Orthodox faith. He's a person. Bishops are people. Their job is to preserve the Orthodox faith. And if they deviate from the Orthodox faith through innovation, then they're heretics.
causes a massive epistemological issue for the church. If that was truly the case, then you could never be certain that that the bishop that you're under in, that the priest you're under has grace.
It's really a question. We're talking about public proclamations. The problem with David's argument is that he's now going to talk about secret, or it seems he's implying that we're going to have to deal with secret heretics. The church has no issue with secret heretics. They can be discovered and anathematized after death. The issue is public proclamation of heresy. And if you publicly proclaim, that's why the canons say bareheaded in the church, then you are a heretic. This is not some sort of hidden secret game. When you have the ecumenical patriarch saying that the Pope is the first bishop of the church and praying with him in ecumenical doxologies with him listed as the first bishop of the church, he's proclaiming the Pope of Rome is the head of the church. That is a public thing. It's so public, there are loads of YouTube videos about it, and I invite people to look those up.
Will never be 100% certain. And St. Augustine argued against this with the Donatists, and I will use his argument that he uses against Donatists to the fake Orthodox. And so how will you know for certain that your bishop or priest abide by the canons and or aren't secret heretics? How do you
That's not an issue. We already covered it's not an issue because we're not talking about secret heresy. It's good that he's using the argument against the Donatists. It would be nice if he used them against Donatists, but okay.
know that the priest that baptized you or confirmed you had grace? How can you know for certain? Ultimately,
If his bishop confesses the true faith, we know for certain. If his bishops confess the true faith, we know for certain. If the entire synod confesses the true faith, we know for certain. This is a stupid argument.
it's impossible to know these things. And so the entire
It's like really not impossible to know these things. These things they say these things in public. It's like the opposite of impossible. It's very, very possible to know these things.
structure crumbles down. And we can see the fruits of St. Augustine's argument in church history by looking at St. Constantine and Eusebius. Eusebius, even after Nicaea, had Arian tendencies. And despite the fact that the possibility of him still retaining heretical Arian beliefs was high, the fake Orthodox still consider St. Constantine's baptism to be legitimate.
It's worth noting that in the actual liturgical text that St. Constantine is baptized by St. Stephen, there have been debates as to who precisely baptized St. Constantine, but there was never a doubt he was Orthodox, so this is a stupid argument.
Otherwise, how could he even be a saint, right? And now that's done, let's consider the second objection, and an objection stating that are we obligated to break communion with those that are heretics or canon breakers? Not all the time. So, for example, during the height of the Arian crisis, there was a time where only 5 bishops were Orthodox. Yet we
That's not exactly accurate, but we'll go with that. Okay, so only 5 bishops are Orthodox. That would mean the other ones are what? They're heretics.
You can observe that those bishops didn't schism from the church. They were still in communion with the Arians. They didn't leave the church. With
That's not true at all. He's just wrong on the history.
the heretical Arian bishops. And they also remained in communion with each other, who was in communion with the rest of the church. And there's another example of Saint Gregory.
It's worth noting that this was part of the reason why the First Ecumenical Council was called, because of a lot of breaking communion that David is pretending doesn't exist.
Gregory the Elder, who's the father of Saint Gregory of Nazianzus. He signed a semi-Arian creed in 361. He pronounced the semi-Arian creed, and the Orthodox monks excommunicated him for doing this. Yet others and his son, Saint Gregory of Nazianzus, stick with him. And in 364, after Saint Gregory the Elder pronounced the Orthodox confession, Saint Gregory Nazianzus referred to these monks that excommunicated him as hasty, and he advised them that they should not return to their own vomit.
Okay, that's wonderful. St. Gregory the Elder repented, gave an Orthodox confession. His son obviously understood him well enough to know that this was probably all due to a misunderstanding. And this is David's argument for the ecumenical patriarchate recognizing Rome, for the recognition of Anglican mysteries on the part of multiple innovating hierarchies, the Assisi meeting, the meetings that they've been having now, the meetings they're planning to have in Nicaea, the constant recognition of heterodox mysteries causing the debate over rebaptism that is happening right now with Father Peter Heers. And this is his evidence. His evidence is in St. Gregory the Elder, a very old monk who made a mistake, repented. We continue.
And let's talk about Saint Cyril once more and with Nestorius. Saint Cyril maintained communion with those that communed with Nestorius, including the Antiochian Christologists, who were fervent defenders of Nestorianism.
I remind you back to the beginning of the video that this entire crisis that led to the Ecumenical Council deposing Nestorius was approximately 2 years, during which many people did break communion with Nestorius, including St. Celestine, but David doesn't want you to know that because he doesn't want you to know the history, because if you know the history, you'll know he's wrong.
And so we can observe from all of these events that maintaining communion with these people at times is the better option.
Even though that's not really what happened, and it's not the better option.
And these aren't the only problems with fake Orthodox. There's various other issues that I want to tackle about the fake Orthodox. And the first one will be about the misinterpretation of the canons. The two favorite canons that they like to use against real Orthodox is Canon 15 of First Second Council, and particularly this part is where they really like to refer. But as for those persons, on the other hand, who on account of some heresy condemned by holy councils or fathers, withdrawing themselves from communion with their president, who, that is to say, is preaching the heresy publicly and teaching it barehead in church, such persons not only are not subject to any canonical penalty on account of their having walled themselves off from any and all communion with the one called a bishop before any consular or synodal verdict has been rendered, but on the contrary, they shall be deemed worthy to enjoy the honor which befits them among Orthodox Christians, for they have defied not bishops, but pseudo-bishops and pseudo-teachers, and they have not sundered the union of the church with any schism, but on the contrary have been sedulous to rescue church from schisms and divisions. The problem is not what this canon says, because this canon is indeed orthodox. The problem is the interpretation. This does not say that we should completely separate from the church that are in communion with those that quote unquote openly preach heresy.
Actually, no one said it's separation from the church. This is the same argument that I heard again with the debate with Resident Sleeper on the Crucible, which unfortunately is this presupposes that the innovating bodies are the church. That's not what happened. And so if we go to Canon 15 of the First Second Synod, and it says, we can safely say that David's reading was correct there. However, the interpretation actually says, if we were to read it. Give me just a moment, because I'm going to bring it up. If we can just bring this up for just a moment here, because this is apparently, there seems to be a bit of an issue. Well, you don't understand the interpretation of Canon 15. Well, let's find out what the interpretation says, because, apparently we don't understand the interpretation. The interpretation says, and we'll go, this is the first part of it. I'm going to skip to what's relevant. And it says, but these provisions are of effect if priests separate from their bishops, or bishops separate from their metropolitans, or if their metropolitans separate from their patriarchs on account of certain criminal charges of fornication, say, of sacrilege, of other serious crimes. In other words, sins. It's to avoid Donatism. If, however, the said presidents are heretics and preaching their heresy openly, and on this account are subject to them separate themselves, even though it be before there has been a synodal trial concerning this heresy, but are even deemed to deserve fitting honor as Orthodox Christians, since not only have they caused no schism in the church on account of their separation, but they've rather freed the church from schism and the heresy of their pseudo-bishops. See Apostolic Canon 31. Translation: he actually doesn't understand the interpretation, or more likely, because he read it, he doesn't want you to understand the interpretation. Vladika Benedicite. I'm glad you're here. I'm basically I know we've dealt with the True Orthodoxy debunked video in a long one, but people have asked for kind of like a live debunking of the the wording in the video, and I'm about 8 minutes away from done. So basically, what we were covering here was the claim that, frankly, we don't understand how Canon 15 is to be interpreted, even though the interpretation is on the next page. So let's get back to this video and let's finish it off.
Didn't we deal this already?
We didn't do a live one, and it was asked for because we did do a longer show on it. But I think people wanted to see an actual live response, back forth.
You already did. All right. Well, I'll let you take care of it.
Okay. Well, I'm almost done here.
All right.
Okay. So
God is telling you to be like Saint Kirill. Saint Kirill anatomized Nestorianism before the Council of Ephesus. This canon is telling you to be like Saint Kirill. It's not telling you to be like the fake Orthodox that just leave the church altogether.
Just a reminder, in case you want to rewind, this particular council is the very basis for Canon 15. So he's not only wrong, he's misrepresenting the history.
Together. Another canon that should be brought up to attention is the Sigillian of 1583. The Sigillian of 1583 condemns the Gregorian calendar for changing the Paschalian. And while we know that the Sigillian did happen, what we know about the Sigillian today turns out to be forged. It's not even a real Sigillian. So we don't have the full details of this anymore. All we know that it condemned the Paschalian, which the new calendar doesn't even use the new Paschalian.
The new calendar originally did use the new Paschalian. The revised Julian calendar was actually a fix for using the entire revised Julian, which was originally the Gregorian, which is why Finland is completely on the new calendar. And from what I understand, soon Ukraine will be too.
Of the Roman Catholics, it still uses the Orthodox Paschalian. The succession of the fake Orthodox are also inconsistent, and we have already noted with the past examples. Even if we ignore them, there was a period of time where it was the Roker bishops that ordained some fake Orthodox bishops. Amongst them were people that believed that the Roman Catholic communion was legitimate until Vatican II and new calendars. So even their own.
I want to remind the audience one more time that earlier in the video, the people he's talking about that supposedly recognize the Roman Catholics and are these horrible fake Orthodox are the pre-revolutionary Russian and Greek churches.
Own succession is based off on these people who have no grace. The fake Orthodox also regard other fellow fakes with contempt. If you had two fake Orthodox arguing against you, saying that your church is graceless, the likelihood that the church they are in not recognizing the other is also very high. So even if they're on the same team, they're not really even on the same team. They're just on the same team and hating your church.
I think there are enough true Orthodox in our chats. I think there are enough true Orthodox that we talk to on a regular basis. And I think the fact that we do have living communions of true Orthodox bishops all over the world just makes David a liar here. But he could also just be ignorant. But if that hopefully will be corrected now, maybe he can do some research, which he won't.
Hating the Orthodox Church. And this is certainly not a surprise when you think about it. It's the rigorous view is going to cause further schisms. When you apply the logical consequence of fake orthodoxy, you're going to be in schism with everyone else, and you're going to think, well, I'm the only one who has grace out of all of these people.
We've talked about St. Basil's shipwreck letter till we're blue in the face. This has always happened in times of heresy because usually the heretics take large positions of power and it takes a long time to resolve the issues. Of course, from David's perspective, the church should stay even if it's heretical. And actually, it seems he seems to like the heretical sections more than the others.
And to the fake Orthodox, they might come up with an objection. They might look at this video and say, well, some of your examples aren't valid. Like when you talk about Nestorianism and Arianism, there weren't canons that condemned them at the time, right? When St. Cyril condemned Nestorius with Teval anatomizations, the Council of Ephesus didn't depose him yet. Okay, so he can still be considered the Nestorianism wasn't uncanonical.
That's actually still wrong. We covered that in the beginning of this video. I hope you're starting to realize just precisely how deceptive this man's argument is. We've covered the separations that occurred during the Nestorian period. We've covered what the council did and how those form the backbone of Canon 15 of the First Second Synod, a live application of how the church does things. David's view is ahistorical and honestly a little deceptive.
So he's still technically a bishop.
And no, he's technically not.
You and I know that this argument is really bad because saying that presupposes that, for example, the canons are what gave Christ these things. Like, for example, Nicaea 1 is where Christ got his divinity. If you follow the logic,
if he really believes that Christ's divinity wasn't established until the First Council of Nicaea, there's very little to talk about.
Yet that is not true. As a matter of fact, we could even say that Christ's divinity was always dogma. It was always dogma, and believing otherwise was always a heresy. All right?
Yeah, that's true. That's correct.
And what canons do is that they tell you the dogma. They don't establish, they don't create a new dogma, if you try to get what I'm saying. And on that topic, heretics weren't the only people that believed in heresies. There were saints that had heretical views, like Saint Gregory of Nyssa, who believed in universalism. So
Saint Gregory of Nyssa supported the concept, but it's overextension to say that he was a real universalist.
Saint Gregory of Nyssa not a saint anymore because he had one heretical view? No.
Note that he's trying to preserve the idea that one can be orthodox while having heretical views.
That's stupid.
Probably because his hierarchy is filled with heretical views.
The final objection will be that the rigorous view is not endorsed in the Bible. So, for example, in Numbers 15:32 to 36, we can see that the Sabbath is punishable by death. Yet Christ said that doing work on the Sabbath is permissible. So who is right here? Well, actually, both are correct. In Mark 2:33 to 28, Christ retells the story of King David breaking the canons by eating the bread that only Levites were supposed to eat. And also, despite the many problems the Pharisees had, Christ still held them as legitimate authority. He didn't schism from the Pharisees. He didn't tell anyone to schism from the Pharisees.
The Pharisees were a heretical sect and the Jews were temple worshippers at the time. This is like Protestant level argumentation.
He says to Saint Fotini, who is the woman at the well, that salvation is of the Jews. In Matthew 23, he says the Pharisees sit on the mercy seat of Moses. And so when you look at overall church history, when you look at the canons, and when you look at the Bible, there's not a single thing that supports the fake Orthodox position.
And even though literally every single thing that he said was not only disprovable, it's disprovable from the rudder, disprovable from the history of the church, and we can source everything that we're saying, unlike David.
And I would like to conclude by telling something to those that are in the so-called true Orthodox Church.
Well, we're listening.
And this is something very important. All right. So when you say
Okay.
that our church has a problem, and you say that the Orthodox Church has an issue,
No, I didn't say that the Orthodox Church has an issue. I'm saying that innovators aren't part of the Orthodox Church.
you're not saying anything wrong. If you have noticed throughout this video, I did not try to defend Bartholomew's issues. I did not try to defend other patriarchs' problems.
You actually are indirectly defending them by demanding that people remain in communion with them.
But the question that we need to ask is this: since when did we not have problems? Look at church history. We always had issues. The church was
And the church solved those issues with councils.
always full of issues, full of problems, and full of heretics within.
No, that part's wrong. Full of problems, sure. Full of heretics, but they didn't stay within. They leave the church.
And so breaking from the church and abandoning it is not going to solve these issues.
Okay? And the canon already covers that because, as we mentioned, in Canon 15 and in the previous canons of the Council of Ephesus, those who broke from heretical bodies are not leaving the church. They're preserving it.
Okay? You won't be saving the church by just running away and pretending everything is peachy in your own TO parish when it's even worse there.
Actually, that's exactly what we're doing, and that's why more and more people are coming to true Orthodox churches.
And you can also do the same in a real Orthodox parish. So what's even the point of schisming, right?
We know for a fact, even based on recent histories with people who have become true Orthodox, that that's a lie. There are people in World Orthodox parishes who are told not to even read the rudder. We've forced this issue, and it's becoming more visible. But no, this is not true at all. And a lot of people who have problems with World Orthodoxy are basically told to shut up or leave.
And so if you want to keep Holy Orthodoxy alive, you have to first come back home. And after that is done, you can talk about the problems of ecumenism. You can talk about all of that. I will 100% support you because, as I said, there are problems in the church and they need solving. But the people...
If you don't believe that your metropolitan is a heretic when he's talking about ecumenism, then you would fall under the condemnation of Canon 15 of the First Second Synod because you would be causing a disturbance in the parish. So this is all just lies. It really is.
That want to solve it, if they run away, then the church is just going to get weaker. And so...
it's not the church anymore if they're preaching heresies. Find true bishops.
Hopefully everyone that watched this video learned something new, and at the very least are convinced that this so-called true Orthodoxy is not the way to go. And if you like this vid, just click like and subscribe if you want to see more content, because there's going to be more content coming next. And may the Holy Trinity bless you all. Thank you all for watching.
I didn't know he was a priest. But anyway, I am kind of glad that that's over because, quite frankly, I did learn something. I learned that David Erhan sits on a throne of lies. So anyways, let's see here. We'll take a look at the comments here. And if the Sigillian was a forgery, I don't know why they have it plastered on the wall in St. Pantaleon's Monastery on Athos. LOL. That's true. The Sigillian condemns the entire new calendar, not just the new Pascha. Also true. Not to mention there are multiple Sigillians besides 1583 that condemn the new calendar. Also true. Whoever does not follow the holy customs of the church with the Holy Ecumenical Council's decree and the Holy Pascha calendar have enacted us for us to follow. 1756 is the most notable one. I'm so glad you guys are picking up all this information. This is so great. We don't have to explain it for you. Because, yeah, there's all this information. It's obvious. It's there. And these guys just lie. And so, David Erhan has directly defended Bart multiple times. He's had pictures with him. He brags about this. If anyone's pretending and faking that there's some, fighter against ecumenism when they're like hanging out with the most ecumenist people on earth, then, it's just lies. His server's full of MP defenders. It's not so rosy over there. Not sure what that means. I assume it's related to the EP-MP split. Okay, but yeah, we'll be clipping that, and that will become a clip for this week, and I guess we'll probably title it, True Orthodox Answer, True Orthodoxy Debunked ad nauseum. And hopefully that is the last one we'll ever have to do. Well, on this topic, really, we're not doing any more on this video. We're done. We've killed this video dead. It's just gone. Okay. Patriarch Dositheos condemned the new calendar with multiple pan-Orthodox synods in Constantinople and many regional in Jerusalem. Yeah. And what Erhan is doing, whether he's doing it on purpose or not, is soul-destroying. It is sad. I hope he becomes TO. Well, I hope if he realizes he's sitting on a throne of lies, he will, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen.
Is there any place online that has a translation for Patriarch Dositheos's condemnations?
Good question. I'm not sure. Yadish brought that up. Yatish, Yatish, sorry about the mispronunciation. The first one, you wouldn't happen to have any of those it's one of the decrees as found in the Confession of Dositheos is what is saying.
Okay, let me look.
Okay. So we'll find it. We'll put up a link. Better education will solve many things for a lot of people. And I'm saying because we need to have these ready. These are useful.
Which of the articles, I guess, from the confession?
Sava, which of the articles was it? If you have it in front of you.
Here's the Confession of Dositheos.
Okay. You have the dates. I don't have the exact condemnations. Okay. Interesting. The modernists and humanists hate the Synod of 1672 because it's one of the most direct condemnations of the new calendar. Let me just see if I can find it. Give me just a moment. You found it?
I give you a link in the private chat.
Give me a moment. Going into the private chat. Okay, so give me just a moment here.
I don't know if I have time to read all of it, but if somebody knows the specific section, it would help.
Trying to see if I can find it as fast as I can. Okay, give me a moment. If there is somebody who's noted that, let me know because I'm going to have to find that. I'm still looking as well. Give me a moment here.
It might be in the Acts of the Council, which you can find on Google Books, but these are just the decrees with an epilogue and 4 questions.
Okay.
So I don't really know. I mean, I maybe have read it one time. I mean, I think I've read the Acts one time a few years ago.
Yeah, we definitely want to get that if we can. Oh, well, here we go. Let me see here. Okay, I'm looking at where it says, therefore, in seeing the Parakletic, the Triodion, and the Menaion perform a work in no way on becoming Christians. Let me see here.
Let me look up the Acts of the Council.
Okay.
I'm going to put this in the private chat.
Okay.
So you can see it. Here it is. That contains the full Acts of the Council. See if I can find something.
Do I have any luck opening these? Oh, this is a free book. Okay, so this is good. One moment.
Well, anyway.
I'm searching. Let me see here. Okay, so sometimes we have to go through these and let me see here.
Well, the whole book is like 100 pages or something.
Yeah,
you're probably not going to find it in one. It's actually 150 pages or so.
Yeah,
I doubt you're going to find it in time, unless you read through the whole text.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to speed through it if I can, but I'm at 53, so let me see here. Let me try something.
What source says it mentioned the council issue? I guess one of the things you have to do when you I'm not attacking anybody here, but I'm saying one of the things that needs to be done is when you have a list saying this council did this or this council did that, and it just mentions the council did it. What needs to happen is someone has to take these texts and compose like primary source links to them, all right, or even large quotes with a link to an available translation and such. And if it's not translated, we have to find some way to get someone to translate the material. So
let me see here. All right, let's see there. Yeah, it's gonna take a little bit as I keep going. How are things going up, Ladika?
they're all right.
Okay, thank God. Let me see here. Okay. So, against Kirill Lucaris. Okay. Yeah, if I had this going, let me see here. Okay. Yeah, if there was a kind of a link to that. I'm not seeing it. I'm about 92 pages in, so 105 actually. And let me see here. I don't doubt it. It's just that I'm not seeing it. And I'd have to find it. Let's see. Because a lot of it is about the condemnation of Kirill Lucaris, but not of.
I mean, it presumes they're following the church calendar. I definitely can see that. So.
Oh yeah, well that is obvious, and but it seems more. I'm curious as to whether there is anything about the calendar.
I don't think Kirill Lucaris himself ever did. He ever? I don't think he ever.
No, he always used the Orthodox calendar.
I mean, and technically, people. There you still find people today who say Kirill Lucaris never taught Calvinism, for example.
Yeah, that that the letters weren't written by him.
Yes.
So. Okay. Checking almost. I'm at a page 162 right now, and I'm still not seeing it. And so,
all right. Well, let's just let people in the audience look through it later.
Okay. Yeah. If you guys can find it, I'm going to put a link to this Acts and Decrees of the Synod of Jerusalem here. But if he got confused, he thought it was in the confession.
Well, it's good to read the Acts of the Council.
Anyway. Yeah, it's still good to read them anyway. They're still very, they're useful for knowledge purposes. So, there's no such thing as bad information. Well, I mean, there is such thing as bad information, but that's misinformation. But the point is, as long as it's real information, it's good information. So
I should point out that I was reading through the comments. In the ecclesiastical history of Sozomenus, who was not an Arian but was Orthodox, he does recount that St. Constantine was baptized near his deathbed by in Nicomedia. Now, he doesn't say Eusebius of Nicomedia did the baptism.
Right.
Of course, Eusebius, just so we know, Eusebius and Nicomedia, while St. Constantine was alive, never claimed to be an Arian. I mean, he was secretly an Arian, but he had to publicly accept the Nicene Creed.
Right.
At the time.
Which is
however, like hymnography in the church, traditionally it says St. Sylvester baptized.
Okay, I said St. Stephen by mistake. You're right, it's St. Sylvester.
Now, I think in the Greek church, they actually you'd have to look on the feast of Saint Constantine and Saint Sylvester in the Greek liturgical books. But last time I looked, they had removed those hymns since at least probably the late 19th century. The Russian Orthodox texts, which are generally the most conservative Byzantine texts, still have the hymnography, like in 2 or 3 places that say that Saint Constantine was illuminated with baptism by Saint Sylvester.
Oh, okay.
Now I don't know if that's because there were various movements in the 18th and 19th century in Constantinople that I think there was something called the Voliakis reforms in the 1880s, where they I think they rearrange large portions of the service books. Every now and again, you will find in 18th and 19th century Greek writers almost sort of this like some of them, like even in 20th century writers, you'll find like writers saying things like St. Peter and Paul never died at Rome, which I don't know why. It's almost like a reaction to arguing with Roman Catholics or something. So anyway, if somebody could find that in the Greek books, it'd be great. But I absolutely know for certain that those hymns are contained in the Russian books, and St. Photius does mention it. Now, you could always say that, well, this is just like a legend invented in the 400s or something. You know, I mean, we could go through that. I mean, it's just as likely that the Arians always sort of have this practice where they never accepted baptism by Orthodox, by the way. And so it's very possible that when St. Constantine, I mean, this is just like a reconciling theory here, is that when St. Constantine, like the last 6-7 weeks of his life, when he was dying, that, you know, remember he was surrounded by his sister and other family members or other entourage who were trying to rehabilitate Arius. He never went down that route. They claimed Arius was falsely accused. That way they could still say they accept Nicaea, but still try to rehabilitate Arius. Right. It's very possible that he just, when you're dying, sometimes like a few weeks before you die, your mind isn't the greatest. You know, for all I know, they could have just taken him in like Tunica Medea and said, "Oh, Your Majesty, you know, you need to be, you know, you need to be baptized." And like, well, I was baptized. Well, no, you just forgot. You know, who knows if you ever have experienced with you know, controversies between family members when it's like, you know how things can go. People can try to control the last days of granddad or grandma or what have you. So, I mean, I'm thinking there are possibilities, because remember, they did allow St. Constantine to set as sort of a de facto president of the First Ecumenical Council.
Right.
I mean, if they thought he was just some unbaptized, you know, catechumen, would they have done that? Yeah, you know, I you know, who knows? I don't think, you know, probably not. But anyway, I'm just saying is that they were there, that you do have that mentioned, although there just as other explanations.
But well, it's worth noting that Erhan's explanation requires.
Oh, he brings that up.
Yeah, he brings it up, and he basically says, "Oh, Saint Constantine was totally baptized by an Arian." And then,
okay. Well, that's interesting, because if that's the case, you can just go to heretics and get baptized. Don't worry about going to Orthodox.
That's exactly his argument, ultimately, in a nutshell.
Well, heck, if that's the case, why not just get baptized by us then?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're like, well, they're not part of the church, well, then you claim an Arians baptized in
Arians can be part of the church. Why not? Hey.
It all sort of starts to fall apart when you go down that route, because if you think about it, how is ecumenism supposed to defend people who have the ecumenical heresies or ecumenist ideas? How are they supposed to defend the concept that you got to join? You can accept ecumenism, but you got to join only this one ecumenist church as the one true church.
Because aren't they all possibly holding the truth? You know, I mean, ultimately, really, you know,
because you
shoot yourself in the foot.
I mean, and I doubt most of these people are adopting some sort of like St. Augustine theory about baptism or something like that. Yeah. But even St. Augustine would say if you knowingly go to heretics to receive baptism, it does not benefit you.
Yeah.
The most he would say is that, well, if you're dying, you could ask somebody to like do that or what have you. But then you could always have anyway. So, I mean, it's a very odd, strange way of looking at church history. It's an erroneous way of looking at church history.
Very true. Atomic Lead Right sounds similar to St. Justinian's alleged support for monophysitism in his last days.
Well, I remember that's Evagrius of Antioch, or Scholasticus, in the 590s, mentions that.
Yeah,
I should point out here. You can read. I mean, you can read the histories of Evagrius. They're on the Roger Pierce site.
Mm-hmm.
And Evagrius himself was not a heretic; he was Orthodox. He was the chancellor for the Patriarch of Antioch. But I think maybe there's only one, or that may be the only source that says it. Maybe I'm willing to be corrected on that. But you have to remember, during his time and after, especially after he reposed, Saint Justinian, even among the Orthodox, had significant detractors.
Because the secret history, etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously Porphyrius himself. We don't even. He may have just simply been a pagan. Yeah. And there's two theories about the secret history. One is that Porphyrius was part of the aristocratic class that became disillusioned with Justinian in the middle and later part of his reign. And so he sort of like wrote this like vindictive history, because I mean it says stuff like Justinian's head floated off his body and he was a sorcerer. And he was like sort of like Emperor Palpatine or something. I mean, like, I mean,
it really makes him out to be really evil.
Yeah. And terrible Theodora, and all those insults and things like that. I mean, a lot of historians, even if they accept credibility of parts of the secret history, they don't accept the parts about Justinian was like this, had these magical powers and such. Yeah. The other is that Porphyrius wrote the text just in case the government got overthrown. Of course, remember, there were like 2 or 3 plots to overthrow Justinian. Like there was a plot by the banking establishment, like the bankers' clan or something like that.
Right, yeah.
Because they didn't like Justinian because he, had control. Because obviously banking elite are always trying to get into power. And so a figure like Justinian is not going to be amenable to that. He's not going to like them. So the other theory that he wrote the text so he could say, just in case like they got overthrown and a new government came to power and they had an investigation, he could say, well, I always opposed him. Although I wonder what's the earliest manuscript of that, because I've heard that the earliest manuscript is from like 1400. And I'm always a little skeptical when I encounter something like that comes out of the Renaissance, which is when they began to really criticize the church fathers, like secretly in various ways. Anyway, and so
the Atomic Lead points out, and this is reminding me of the Papist claim that Saint Photius rose to the Patriarch with the help of a sorcerer. Yeah,
apparently a lot of sorcerers.
Sorcerers abound.
Well, remember the Arians accused Saint Athanasius of being a necromancer.
Yep.
They said that he had killed this man whose name I cannot remember, and he had taken his hand and mummified it, and he used it to perform magical rituals to like raise.
And then Saint Athanasius brings the guy out.
Oh yeah. And then
brought him from the dead.
Yeah, exactly. And what about his hand? Well, he just regrew the hand. He used his magical powers to regrow the hand.
Should have used that in a debate with a vegan.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But what was I saying about Saint Constantine? So. You do have writers like Evagrius Scholasticus. Even Saint Isidore in a few places does not. Like 1 or 2 places he calls Saint Justinian the tyrant, and some other people do. I mean, I'm not saying he's a heretic. I don't think.
Well, Saint Isidore would have been from his home country, so he might have.
Well, in the case of Saint Isidore, I think the main problem was that the Visigoths. There was a campaign launched to take over Spain by the Western troops of the empire. And they took over southeastern Spain, I believe.
Yeah.
And so I suppose even by the time of St. Isidore's episcopacy, the Byzantines still reclaimed or occupied, depending how you look about it, about a fifth of the Visigothic kingdom. So if St. Isidore had said, well, I support Justinian, or I support the Byzantine emperor, I don't know how that would have gone over in the newly, Christian kingdom of Spain if he was perceived as supporting a foreign power, even if it was a fellow Christian power. Anyway, but the criticisms of Saint Justinian were that he essentially, when they call him a tyrant in these few examples, besides this other example, what they really mean is that he was very domineering. Saint Justinian's view was sort of that remember, there had been this 40-year period in which essentially heretics had taken over large portions of the church and had created a schism. It's called the Akakian schism. All right. Justinian and his uncle Justin come to power in 519. They kick out the heretics, and they have the new patriarch proclaim adherence to Chalcedon, and communion is restored with the other churches. All right. There is also this position that Justinian and others have that the sort of aristocratic class, or the who have become oligarchic. All right, that's always this issue where is something a true aristocracy that is the role of the best, or is it or has it become an oligarchy? All right, which is rule of the powerful without any regard to virtue. And so Justinian's position was that you have to, in many cases, with people in positions in the hierarchy, the ecclesiastical or the priestly hierarchy and in the civil hierarchy, you have to deal harshly with them. There was one case in which there were two bishops, I think one from Rhodes and another from Greece, who had been accused, had been well known as pederasts for years, and there was some sort of paralysis in the synodal structures where nobody could deal with these pedophiles for whatever. I think they may have been politically powerful in like their local establishments, so this was like a massive scandal. So Justinian just had them arrested, and his view is that if the patriarch or the local archbishop's not going to deal with them, well, I'm going to deal with them. He had them arrested, tried in Constantinople, and then he had them castrated, and they died a year later or a few months later from what happened to them. All right. So
between how he handled the pedophiles and how he handled the sports fans, really, I think he's definitely in my top.
I think what he and others have come to the conclusion is that you can't really rule this empire by
being nice.
Yeah, I mean, because people who it's like sort of like if you run a business and you're trying to be nice to everybody and you give everything away for free, everybody's going to take advantage of you.
Yep.
All right. And especially if you have if you as the emperor have to think of yourself as the father of the nation, you have this greater responsibility before God and to these people that you have to act in some ways very harshly. Now, there may be bishops and nobles that may think, well, yeah, that's true to some extent, but maybe he went overboard. Okay, fine. But I'm just saying that's the context when you read, like, even Orthodox writers in the 580s or 90s criticize Justinian. They will say it for those various reasons and such. So you have to take things with a grain of salt in some of those critiques. Like I know, like St. John of Biclero, who was exiled into Constantinople from by the Arians of Spain. Like the Visigoths exiled him to Constantinople for like 17 years. All right. And I think he doesn't. I don't think he really mentions Justinian. I have to go back and read his chronicle. But I mean, he talks about, and so do other sources, that after Justinian died, among some of the bishops and the other nobles, there was this reaction where Justinian dies, Justin II becomes emperor, who's I think his nephew or so, because Justinian I think either had no kids or the kids didn't want to become involved in the government. I can't quite remember at the moment. So Justin II becomes emperor. He immediately relieves the tax burden on the nobility. Which creates problems because and then a few years later, the Lombards pour in from the north and conquer large portions of Italy. The army could fight them, but the army has to be paid. You have to equip the troops. You have to feed them, all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is that one of the complaints that people like Porphyry and others, whether they were Christians or pagans, had, if they were nobles, was that they were having to pay twice the tax burden. Well, the issue is that if you want to feed the army, because soldiers have to eat more than just 2,000 calories a day if they're marching like 10 or 20, 30 miles a day. All right. If they're fighting on a regular basis, you're going to have to pay more. Now also because Justinian conquered North Africa and other parts of reconquered other areas, it also opened up, there was more grain coming into the country. All right. There was a greater tax base, you might say. He expanded the tax base. All right. But still, if you're like a noble and you're having to pay 50%, even instead of like your usual 15 or 15%, while you may still be in great, look, I mean, if you're a peasant and you have to pay 50%, that's bad. All right, because you may not have enough to feed your family. And people weren't necessarily starving during that time. the tax burden was chiefly shifted, I believe, to the more to the nobility. So they didn't really. My own view is they didn't really. They sort of is an exaggerated complaint. You're always going to find that among the super wealthy and such. But anyway, my point, just to finish up, is you have people accusing Justinian of the main accusation is that he was inclined to Orthodoxitism, which was a heresy created by Julian of Halicarnassus. That's the accusation against him. I don't know if there's any real substantiation of the accusation other than his enemies saying that. And you have to be very careful when someone's enemies accuse a saint of the church or something. Just like someone says, well, somebody accused St. Jerome of being mean, therefore he's not a saint in the church. That's insane. That's crazy. Or such. So
I'm into that. Now, here's a question. We got this kind of was a discussion that was on the Discord server. Again, we always, while it's growing, and we always welcome questions. But apparently, in my debate with the vegan, the question of cannibalism came up. And now this is something that, even though we pretty much settled the question as well as we could without information, we know in cases of church history that there have been wars and so on and so forth. Have there ever been penances assigned for, say, like something like the movie Alive or something, like where like they might have eaten a person?
Well, I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I mean, if they're just eating a dead person,
yeah. I mean, I assume that there's probably some kind of probe. It would probably be in some regional council or something.
Yeah, I mean, all I could think of just off the top of my head, just to make a supposition, there probably was. I mean, as long as you didn't murder the person, I don't endorse cannibalism, even if you just find a dead body, obviously.
Yeah.
So I don't really have enough information.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was something in canonical precedent that immediately ran to mind. But it's definitely worth researching.
Maybe I'll give an answer next week.
Yeah, not that we're endorsing cannibalism, but the point is, just so you know, the more you know. That's where we're kind of going with it. Again, it's a live Q&A. And there's anyone who has questions, comments, feel free to put them on. We've already we're actually at an hour and 36 minutes. So if we don't see any questions, by say like the 45 mark, we'll probably cut we'll cut it for the evening. But outside of that, most of it we've been talking about, the David Erhan thing. I mentioned my trip last week. Obviously, for the family's privacy, I can't talk too much about that. But so that other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So let me think here. New thing, if there's any news coming up. I do see that there was something Father Antonio sent me, which I'm probably going to do an article on, about how they're really pushing for kind of like maybe some kind of intercommunion or joint celebration or calendar switch in 2025, the Constantinople and stuff. Because in 2025, the dates of Pascha match for the Orthodox and the Catholics. So,
is this just going to be is something really going to happen, or is this just going to be just another big event?
I don't know. The language they're using, I feel like they really want us to think something is going to happen. But a lot of the times, what they're doing already is bad enough, and people don't realize it.
Well, the Fanor is at such a position, I think, where even if let's say the Patriarch Bartholomew went to Rome tomorrow or whatever, a few days or whatever, and he quote unquote took communion at like the Papist altar. I don't think anybody who is in communion with him, any of the local patriarchates that are in communion with him, would break communion. I just simply don't think that would happen. Yeah. They might say, well, this is unacceptable. Make some very milquetoast protest at most. And you're probably going to have non-commemorators show up, but they don't care about them. As long as, the bishops, they're not bishops.
Yatish asks, Father Joseph, what do you think happened to most non-commemorators after Crete 2016? Do you feel another non-commemorator wave will happen in 2025? Realistically, I think the real non-commemorator wave is happening now. I think 2025, my personal opinion, is going to be the great disappointment. A whole bunch of people are thinking that there's going to be the break in communion. I think that they're going to keep it exactly the same to steal their thunder and basically make them feel more hopeless. That's what I really think is happening, because we're seeing the movement of people now. So as for the ones in after Crete 2016, I mean, well, it speaks for itself.
I think a lot of them are still hanging around, but they've just gone into oblivion.
Right, because they've
got no bishops. Where are they going to get ordinations from? So if they're not part of a synod resisting or true Orthodox synod that has a functioning hierarchy, well, who do they get their ordinations from? Well, they got to go to heretics that they're not commemorating, and they're not. Are they going to do ordinations for them?
No,
probably not.
Of course not.
So that's obviously an issue that's not brought up in this wider discussion. That if there's sort of stages you go through, and when you're resisting heresy.
Yeah.
Right? If you before you go to this, you can become a non-commemorator. That's sort of a move you do to obviously to cut off communion with a heretic.
Yeah, it's the beginning, right?
And then you try to seek interventions, which is what happened in the case of Saint Cyril and Nestorius. Mm-hmm. People wrote to other patriarchs complaining about this, and to show you how serious the fathers were in the 420s, they went from very early complaints in 428, 429 to an ecumenical council in 431.
Yep.
So 2 years. And by the way, the council vindicated the already non-commemorators among the bishops and priests who broke.
Yeah, we brought this up. With
you did? Okay. All right. Okay, good.
So this again, but I think we're kind of in like a fourth. I want to say we're in a fourth wave of non-commemoration. And the first wave obviously would be what led to the formation of true Orthodox churches around the world. The second really big one was probably
late 1960s. Yes,
right. Yeah,
and remember they had a number of something like 7 bishops of the ecumenical patriarch in northern Greece, led by Augustinus Florina, did cease commemoration of the patriarch. Mm-hmm. The problem is that again, that either those people joined true Orthodoxy or they didn't, and everything kind of just like petered out.
Yeah.
Like Augustinus of Florina is an interesting figure, or a nefarious figure, depending on who you're talking to. I mean, if you're Slavic, you probably didn't like him since he destroyed hundreds of old Slavic churches in northern Greece under the claim that they were, Slavs don't really have a church and it's only the Greek people. But anyway, he was sort of on friendly terms with the true Orthodox in Greece and did have conferences with them. But the problem is that he was never willing to do anything more than say, I support them and I think they're Orthodox. That was basically it, but I'm not going to join them.
Yeah.
And his influence in Greece, while substantial, ultimately it could never lead to anything because these people weren't willing to make any further steps.
Yep.
And you can see that in the state Church of Greece and in the Ecumenical Patriarchate today. That you can pull out a figure like Seraphim of Piraeus, who is a fanatical vaxxer, by the way. He will excommunicate people or suspend priests who refuse to take the abortion vaccine, which is essentially what the COVID vaccine is a product of. It's not just genetic abnormalities it creates and diseases. It's a product of the abortion industry, no matter what they claim, because it was created using fetal cell testing at the very least. All right, if not far more. The more information comes out about it every day. He's fanatical about that. All right, I mean, he claims also other crazy things that go against church tradition, which no one really talks about because for some reason this is acceptable among some of these like neo-traditionalists in Greece. Like he says, Saint Peter never died in Rome, which creates problems for the hymnography once again.
Yep.
Right. It's almost like, well, the Roman Catholics say it, so therefore we don't believe it. Or his claim that he doesn't believe in transubstantiation, and then you come sort of reading like, is he against the terminology? But he's never quite clear about it. His view that the body of the Theotokos was never resurrected. I mean, there's a lot of these guys have like weird views that are semi-Protestant in many ways.
Yeah,
or they're neo-modernistic. They're neo-modernist. They may be anti. It's like almost like they're almost like a version of like the right wing renovationism that exists in Hakka, but they're in the state church.
Yep.
Such.
I think that's a very good way to put it, and it all ties back to Romanides as well.
Yes, he's a big supporter of. Romanides was obsessed with like UFOs and spinal fluid.
Yeah.
So insane. There's something deeply mentally disturbed and spiritually disturbed about these people.
And then, so now I do want to point out now, I generally see the third wave of non-commemoration and movement really begin with the anathema against ecumenism, and I'd say that period extends probably to the MP's 2000 meeting, which led to all the other changes that we would see. Mm-hmm. And then we have today, which is the post-COVID one. This is an interesting question. If 2025 doesn't lead to the big break, what will? I don't think there is going to be a big break, nor does there have to be. If the numbers are correct, say, for example, with the True Orthodox Church of Romania, where it could very well be at this point 1/3 of the Orthodox population.
There are only 19 million people in Romania to begin with.
Yeah. So the point is, once you have, say, even you hit past 50% of the Orthodox population, at that point, where are you going to get the people running the churches from? Ultimately, things start falling apart for the innovators, and the people of the church eventually take over, and voila, the True Orthodox of Romania are now just the Orthodox of Romania. So ultimately, there may not be a big break. What we're seeing now is a disintegration of like nothing we've ever seen before. I mean, look at the chaos that the EP is causing all over the place now. It may cause an acceleration of people to join papism. It may cause an acceleration of like a bigger union, but that will still solve the problem for us in terms of numbers. So the big break has been happening over time. It's just that people don't want to take the step needed to get out of the boiling water. For lack of
remember also, there's sort of this assumption that exists amongst a lot of world Orthodox that the church today, as it manifests in the 20th century, exists in the 20th century. It's like no different, not really any different than it was in the, 9th century or something like that. But I think there's a grave and serious understatement of the fundamental importance that Orthodox monarchy had in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because we go back to either you accept the dualist interpretation attributed to that some attribute to Saint Gelasius, or that Saint Isidore's view, which was more integralist, but that there are two powers within the world. All right, the church, not the world like in the negative sense. Okay,
right.
And those are the Christian, the Orthodox king, and the Orthodox bishop. And in the case of Saint like Isidore and various other writers, their view would be that so this is simply the church. Okay, so there is no czar anymore. All right, there is no Orthodox kingdom anymore. That simply does not exist. So the church still exists. That's true, obviously, but it's been the external manifestation of it has been grievously damaged. The external structures of it, by the lack of a coordinating power like that. All right. So,
now we're hitting something that's, I think, I mean, I hate to say this, but I think the Orthodox Western history informs people more than anything else, which is we're starting to see the development of earthly power vacuums, where basically, I guess you could say even the global authorities as they exist today are so disorganized and so anti-people that it's turning where new structures are being created, new cities, new countries.
Well, it's revolutionary because even the way the 20th century structured itself was so fundamentally alien to all of human history. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I so think in the 21st century is it's an aberration. Either the aberration leads to something like Antichrist, or there is a reprieve in history for whatever reason God grants. Those are really the only two possibilities.
Right. And in that case, we would see, I mean, I hate to say it, but everyone with a crown, your opportunity awaits.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. please.
I forgot what I was going to say. I'll have to think about it.
Well, reader John wrote, I don't think there will be a big break, but rather a death by 1,000 heretical paper cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how they're going. That's kind of how it's going now.
Here's what I was going to say. Remember when they had the schism of, it was a schism where the Hildebrandians effected the Great Schism in 1054. That didn't necessarily, for example, you still have up until the 1098 or 1099 Patriarch John Oxyantes of Antioch. When the Crusaders took the city, they sort of rescued him from being tortured to death by the Muslims. Okay, and he did for a year continue to celebrate with them, and then 6 months really, and then things disintegrated when basically they began to say he's got to submit to, Urban II. That's sometimes acknowledges the break between Antioch and I mean, I hate to call it Rome because it was just the people in charge of Rome, and there was a competitor pope at the time.
Well, yeah, but by 1100 with the death of Clement III, it seems like every
that's actually rather interesting that happened around that same time. Yeah. But my point is that you can also argue that this is sometimes how things happen when there wasn't any big ecumenical council between 1050 and 1100 to deal with these issues. All right. It was sort of chaos. It was chaos. And the various local patriarchates had to make their own judgments over years about what's actually happening to sort through the issues, and they finally did by that time. All right, I don't think you could find anybody who would even claiming to be in communion with Urban II by 1100. I mean, among the Eastern churches, for example. Yeah. And then Urban by 1122 or so, he and his successors had basically consolidated. They had. Around the 1103 or 1104, Pascal III or what have you had his forces laid siege and took over Liège, and there was various military campaigns and conquests.
Yeah, by then they had taken a lot of.
And then it became a problem where they had essentially 150 years of conflict between the German emperor and the Pope, and eventually the Western Empire was destroyed in the 1250s, and they replaced it. What we really call the Holy Roman Empire existing in the sense of a confederation with a weak emperor. That's really a product after 1280 or so, because the papacy did not like the concept of having a strong emperor in the West.
It went against the Dictatus Papae.
Yes, and eventually you find there was these recurring themes in 11th, 12th, and 13th century, even in that period, where people sided with the emperor in the West. They would eventually either resurrect or preserve sort of conciliarism.
Right, but by then they had already been convinced by the age of forgeries and filioquism.
Oh no, I know. So my point is that they were handicapped there was obviously handicapped. My point was that the papacy still realized that it could not simply have this emperor with all this power, because people have this natural tendency, even after the schism in these areas in the West, to view the Christian order as integralist and the emperor as the head of that order.
Correct.
And not the Pope as necessarily the head of the order. Even though the papacy did its best to fight against that concept, and eventually destroyed everything, caused so much problems, and then of course, through the disintegration of the medieval period, all these other factors, you had the Reformation explode on the scene, because any reform in a genuine sense back to the patristic model had become impossible by the time you get 1500. It simply wasn't going to happen. All right, but so you're right. 1,000 death by 1,000
heretical cuts. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're seeing that play out. But again, in the history of the church, this is also not really all that new. This sort of stuff happens. It's not the best of times, but it's as one person once said to me. It was actually it's been said many times. It's not just him, but the idea we forget that in the time of Saint Basil, etc., the church was in absolute chaos. And the world was in absolute chaos, and now we call that the golden age of the church. So who knows what's going to happen? It could be that this is laying the foundation for Antichrist, or it could be that we're on the verge of something new that's probably pretty old.
Any other news?
No, I don't have any here. So I don't have any to cover. I don't think here. Did you? Are you thinking of any story I might have missed?
Let me look. Nope, not much.
All right.
Not much.
Well,
the Patriarch apparently the Patriarch Bartholomew, the Pope, and the Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury had some sort of big ecumenical gathering in the Vatican.
Yeah, I saw pictures of that. That was pretty sad and gross, and maybe I'll just put that picture up because people don't like to be reminded that.
That's if you're under the ecumenical patriarchate. I guess that's essentially there's no way of like no one. If somebody claims like you can be under the Fanar and then like talk to the patriarch, and he's like, you're not going to convince him otherwise in this. This is essentially the position you're done with.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true because it's that is a sad reality. Sad reality of the system today. But there's an alternative. You don't have to be part of it. You can walk away from it.
And of course, the Patriarch Theophilus of Jerusalem meeting with the Pope, gifting him icons and things, I guess.
Oh no, I didn't know about that one.
And he said, "Jerusalem is the mother of all churches."
Oh, well, we'll see. And then, then the Monophysite Malankar Indian Orthodox Patriarch with their current patriarch. Yeah, that was something with the Pope. They mentioned that for 2025 that they're going to do something big with that.
Let's remember they have like relationship with Moscow Patriarchate.
Yeah,
and I sort of see that as partially like ecumenism also has the angle of a political foreign policy. Yeah, exactly. Has a foreign policy angle for partially the Russian Federation.
Well, I just find this kind of strange that they were talking about this new the new DECR head being more traditional, but it looks like he's just being more of a traditional ecumenist, doing exactly what the ecumenists.
You are not going to get an anti-ecumenist as head as any prominent in the ecumenical patriarch. Even among in the Moscow Patriarch, among the so-called like old-style conservatives, like the Blagogan.ru people that are really Soviet Orthodox, it's really how they think. I mean, they say stuff about Stalin was really part. I mean, literally, they had an article recently about how Stalin had returned to the church, and how he really died as part of the church and was.
Oh, I would love to see that because people don't believe that the cult of Stalin is alive in the Moscow Patriarch, and it is. Oh, it is.
Well, let me bring it up for you, and if you want to look at it.
Yeah, no, I think everyone should see it because this is something to remember that when we talk about Sturgeonism, it's not that we talk about it like it's a form or heresy. It's still there.
Well, you have to remember, Kirill did dedicate a statue to Sergius. So what I think is going to happen is many of these people will essentially, they will essentially conform to things like. Oh, here you go. Okay, putting it in the private chat, and then you can post it up there. I think this is it. It's the Google Translate version.
Okay. Well, it's an honorary thing to Patriarch Sergius there.
The title is called "To the 80th Anniversary of the Restoration by I.V. Stalin of the Patriarch in the Russian Church." Okay. So you can read through it.
Yeah, this is actually where this is kind of talking about where he was asked about Sergius, and basically like he kind of went through this and created kind of this. It goes through.
There's also this legend about Metropolitan Elias of Mount Lebanon, who was receiving like visions, and he was directing Stalin about how to conduct the campaign against the Axis powers, and Stalin ordered these famous icons to be flown over Moscow, and I mean it's just invented storytelling. To me, it almost smacks of Sergianists in the 40s and 50s having to like make up stuff with the Soviets to justify this to their people. In some sense. Let me see.
Well, there's also the legend that they put of Saint Matrona of Moscow secretly meeting Sergius that no one heard about until like 2003.
Yes.
No, meeting with Stalin, excuse me, not Sergius. But so this is where they resolved to defrock any clergy who went over to the side of the Nazis against the communists. So yeah, this is it's pretty sad, but pretty pathetic actually. But unfortunately, that is, that's the current history now. That is,
I would, if somebody's really interested in this, there's a numerous articles on this website. Some of them are actually not bad.
Okay.
Some of them are actually objectively all right. Stalin in the church. That obviously others are objectively terrible.
Yeah. I'm putting a link for everyone to read the joyous article. But
this may be the one I'm thinking about right here. I'm going to send you right now. It's called Stalin.
Yeah, the key here is that one thing we definitely want to clearly establish here is that people do not understand that, and I've heard this from multiple people, including Metropolitan Valentine himself. The belief is not that Stalin restored the church. The belief is that Stalin created the Moscow Patriarchate, and the evidence appears to be here that he did. Except they think it's a good thing, and it's not. Okay, so this I can't read the titles on this for some reason because this box.
There's the box over it.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the one maybe this might be the one. This might be the other one I sent you. I don't know if this is the same one. Yes. Look to the last link I sent you, Father Joseph.
Okay, hold on.
This is the one. Okay, good. Okay, now.
So this is about the oral.
I think it's worth going through this just for a few minutes.
Okay, no problem. One moment. Let me increase the size. Okay, so it's Stalin, and I assume that is that.
It's called Stalin in the Church. Is the name of the article. That's Stalin and Sergius.
Is that Sergius or Alexei?
That might be Alexei the First.
Yeah, that's Alexei the First.
Okay, so start reading.
This topic is difficult to study because there are very few verifiable sources.
As there of course.
May as well start with some honesty here. Like, okay, basically, when speaking on this topic, we're forced to use indirect facts or what is called oral tradition. Okay. Those who initially have a negative attitude towards Stalin call these myths about Stalin.
So we can already see where this is started.
We can see where they're going with this, which is like, we know that you guys, there might be some people who really don't believe this stuff, but here's what we're going to talk about.
Especially if your enemy is a Stalin.
Unfortunately, among the clergy and episcopate of the Russian Orthodox Church, there is a widespread negative attitude towards IV Stalin. This is how they teach in our seminaries. This is how many priests preach in churches. It is rare to meet a representative of the clergy who has not even a positive, but at least a neutral attitude towards the figure of Stalin. Allow me to just interrupt. That might be because of the whole killing 27 million Christians thing. The reason is clear. The peak of repressions against the clergy and episcopate of the Russian Church occurred in 1937 and 1938, when Stalin was at the head of the Soviet state. It is enough to look at the church calendar and see that almost every day the church remembers the new martyrs and confessors of Russia, most of whom completed their earthly journey in 1937 and 1938. Thus, in the minds of many representatives of the clergy, persecution against the church is firmly linked with the name of Stalin.
Well, how could you? Yeah, I mean, it's
why would you even think that?
It just happens to coincidence.
It's a coincidence, they just, died.
Right, continue.
First of all, we need to take account of the background of this problem. As is known, the February coup d'etat, which overthrew the sovereign emperor Nicholas II, was either actively supported by the overwhelming majority of the clergy and episcopate of the Russian Church or was met quite favorably.
Now, remember, there were two revolutions in 1970. There was a February Revolution, which was mainly led by liberal Democrats and Masons.
Yeah.
All right, and then there was you had the October Revolution, where the Bolsheviks just took over that government.
Right. Now, the provisional government, in turn, was at least neutral towards the church, and while the Februarists were in power, the church managed to convene a local council which eventually restored the Patriarchate. The Bolsheviks, who came to power in October 1917, officially proclaimed an atheistic ideology and a negative attitude towards the church, which immediately left an imprint on the relationship between the church and the new Soviet regime. His Holiness Patriarch Tikhon, at the beginning of 1918, declared anathema to those who shot religious processions and used other violence against the clergy and believers. During the Civil War, the church actively supported the White Guards, and this is understandable. Whites had a positive or neutral attitude towards the church. Under the White Generals, there was an institution of spiritual administration. Under Denikin, it was headed by Metropolitan Anton Krapovitsky of Kharkov. Under Kolchak, Bishop of Sylvester Olszewski. Under Wrangel, Archbishop of Simferopol Dmitry Abhadze. Naturally, in the eyes of Soviet authorities, the church was firmly associated with a force hostile to the Soviet state. Despite the fact that His Holiness Patriarch Tikhon, after the Civil War, recognized the legitimacy of Soviet power and announced his desire to build relations with the new government. The negative attitude of the Bolsheviks towards the church persisted. Yeah, I mean,
I've heard that contested about what they there are documents that were forged by the Bolsheviks in the name of patriarchy.
Yeah. This was also explained that by the fact that among the leaders of the Bolshevik governments, foreigners and people of other faiths
Jews
dominated. I mean, it says people of other faiths. Okay,
it's really Jews, is what
we know.
Okay, it wasn't schismatic. What old believer is running everything?
No, I think they're talking about the living church people. So yeah.
Okay, go ahead, continue.
Okay, so as well as schismatics who did not have respect for the church, the Soviet government tried to organize a revolution of the church by supporting the living church schism. The security officers persecuted active representatives of the episcopate and clergy. The situation began to improve after 1927, when the locum tenens of the Patriarchal Throne Metropolitan Sergius published a famous declaration, which, however,
the reading through this, it's like everything's matter of factly stated, and they're kind of forgetting the 1,000 facts in between.
Yeah, and they're just
legitimate locum tenens, for example. All right, okay, continue.
Yeah, published almost through the 30s. The repressive policy of the state towards the church continued. The militant atheist rage and the unfinished third 5-year plan was declared a godless 5-year plan. Before the start of the war, there is almost no evidence of a change in Stalin's attitude towards the church, although from the mid-30s he began to carefully pursue a policy of nationalizing Bolshevism in the spheres of culture and education.
National Bolshevism. This is the mythology that Stalin was really sort of like a nationalist.
A Russian nationalist.
Russian national, even though he was Georgian. He was a Russian nationalist. It's based off possibly a misunderstanding of his teaching of socialism in one country.
Well, this is it gets so much better now.
Okay.
Did Stalin know that the victims of the purges of 1937 to 1938 were innocent priests and bishops? I think I knew, although perhaps he did not know the scale and details of the persecution against the church.
Well, apparently, he was a very powerless figure. He was sort of
kind of clueless. But this is not a basis for calling Stalin Diocletian of the 20th century, as liberal church publicists and clergy often do. It's the liberals
and the liberals, right?
It's the liberals, because a real conservative Russian knows that Stalin was a defender of the church.
Okay.
Diocletian nevertheless purposely persecuted the church, and Stalin's purges were, first of all, directed against the party and state elite, who opposed his course towards building socialism in one particular country, which implied some revision of the legacy of Marx and Lenin.
No, I think actually not. I think what it really entailed was that Stalin realized, like other Marxists at the time, that they had to establish Marxist power in the Soviet Union as a base to project the revolution into other places. Because their attempts back in 1919, 1920 to import the Marxist revolution into Poland have been stopped at the Vistula and in other areas. Remember, the communists tried to take over Bavaria, Germany, Austria, and they were defeated back in the early 20s. All right?
Yeah.
So this is really just a tactical restructuring of the Marxist plan. That's all it was.
Yeah, and so this is just awful.
Okay, continue. Let's
really have to. This is terrible.
Well, let's see what they say.
Okay. Well, however, we cannot claim that Stalin's attitude towards the church was the same throughout the years. Stalin's departure for the revolution, in a sense.
No, where are you at, Father?
I'm in here. Was rebellion?
Wait. Go up.
What?
Go up. You missed. You skipped something.
I really don't feel like reading. It's just painful.
Okay, I'll go up to the part that says the personification. I'll start with that. Go up. Okay. All right. Good.
I don't want to talk about Trotsky.
Well, personification of this opposition to Stalin's course was the famous Bolshevik figure Trotsky. However, the repressions which were designed to cleanse the party and state apparatus of Trotsky supporters could not be carried out under the slogan of the fight against the Trotskyists. It was too petty. So they were carried out under the slogan of the fight against the enemies of the people. And this feature of Stalin's repressive campaign was actively used by his opponents. Undoubtedly, in the repressions one can trace a tendency towards stupidity, the meaninglessness of the process itself due to the prosecution of innocent people, representative of the church, military leaders, cultural figures, even party leaders, of Stalin. This is one of the ways of fighting against Stalin by those people who carried out repressions were ideological enemies of Stalin. So, in other words, the enemies of Stalin were killing the enemies of Stalin in order to make Stalin look bad.
And innocent people who just happen to be in the way.
He had no control. It is not surprising the main characters themselves, led by Yezhov, who carried the repressions, were soon themselves repressed. Stalin was in rather difficult conditions, and apparently could not do anything to prevent. He could not do anything.
He was powerless.
Repressions.
Stalin was powerless.
Yeah, this is indirectly evidenced by the phrase he said to Metropolitan Sergius from oral tradition. I don't know if, not the good oral tradition like in the church. Then the church received a lot of what it wanted, even more than the Metropolitan expected. But Stalin told the Metropolitan, quote, "This is all for now, Vladika, that I can do for you." This phrase clearly shows the limitations of Stalin's capabilities. No, it doesn't. It is no coincidence.
He was like, this sorry patriarch.
Now, why was Stalin so incapable? Well, it says it's no coincidence that the meetings with the Metropolitans itself took place in the presence of other members of the Bolshevik leadership, so that Stalin could not be suspected of some kind of sympathy for orthodoxy, which was a crime for a Soviet party leader. What they're essentially saying is Stalin was sympathetic to the church, that he was secretly Orthodox, but he was scared of other people in the Soviet government would overthrow him if they found out.
Dang communists.
Yes.
Poor Stalin.
Okay, so however, we cannot claim that Stalin's attitude toward the... Well, someone can continue reading this.
However, we cannot claim that Stalin's attitude towards the church, I'm not going to read it in Russian, was the same throughout the years. Stalin's departure for the revolution, in a certain sense, was his rebellion against the church and God. We must understand that having come to power, Stalin gradually changed his views on communism, abandoning some of the dogmas of the communist creed, and at the same time, he returned to God.
Okay, okay.
This was evidenced by all the pictures of him in church.
Yes, exactly. I would also like to see he return. I mean, are there speeches from? Can we track speeches from 1942 to when did he die? 1953, 55.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there speeches where he mentions atheism, secularism? I'm vaguely going to say there probably are.
Yeah.
So let's say, even for the sake of argument, which is a great admission, that Stalin had secretly by 44, maybe I was wrong. If he did do that, which I don't believe he did at all.
No.
But yet he did not publicly affirm his orthodoxy, then it'd still be apostasy.
Yeah.
All right. That's the church. That's not how the church operates. Remember, our Lord said, "Those who do not confess me before men, I will not confess before my Father in heaven." All right. So this idea that he was secretly an Orthodox Christian during this time, what's worse, to be secretly an Orthodox Christian but to still allow this massive persecution against the church? I mean, that's terrible.
And
Okay.
it says, I can't.
And this, of course, Patriarch Alexei says that someone asked him how could he serve a memorial service in 1953 for Stalin, who was a atheist, and the Patriarch told someone, "I did not serve a memorial service for an atheist." All right, so that's the justification for people today doing panagidas for Stalin. It says, in fact, they say, obviously, this is jumping to conclusions. Obviously, Alexei knew more than he could say. We are probably talking about the fact that Stalin returned to the church. This means that he confessed and received communion, which, of course, there is no evidence for.
Right.
It's his whole supposition that the Patriarch served a memorial service. Therefore, this means that. Well, it could also mean the Patriarch Alexei didn't really have much. He was scared of getting in trouble with the communist government. So he just said, "Oh, I'm going to do a memorial service for Stalin to show patriotism."
Yeah, because they still had to, show respect for the cult of Stalin. This is where I was referring to. Liberal church leaders question many of the oral testimonies. For example, the fact of Stalin's meeting with Matrona of Moscow, the one that I mentioned, probably didn't happen. But I guess I've never been called a liberal before on this. I'm kind of feeling. On
Vlagagon.ru, if you don't agree with Sergius, you're a liberal. That's their position. I've noticed it over the years.
Well.
I mean, obviously it's crazy. I mean,
now the communists aren't liberals, but we're liberals. I mean,
well, the communists were oftentimes not very liberal. Well, liberals historically, when they have power and authority, are not kind to their enemies.
Yeah.
You can look at things like Bartholomew. I mean, and others. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But in any case, so this mentions the letter of Metropolitan Elijah of the Lebanese mountains, in which he conveyed.
And there's no evidence of. Okay, so anyway, someone can read through this if they want to.
I put a link in the chat.
Now I think this comes from. Go ahead.
Well, dear Duderas, how do MP supporters in Russia explain UConn's 362 from St. Tikhon? They don't. That's basically what it comes down to. They don't even want to think about it. Is that why we sometimes see icons of Stalin? Yes, that is exactly why. Because
there's the famous one of the Stalin behind the MP Metropolitan of Belgorod. Yeah. I mean, you do have MP people. They do mention it. And
they almost put it in the military cathedral, but it caused such a massive protest that Putin was like, "No, don't do it."
Well, I mean, we can also have to be honest here. We want to be honest, obviously, but you do have. He does admit that they do have a lot of people in the MP who weren't comfortable with the cultus of Stalin.
Right, but they're all liberals.
Yeah, so. They're all exactly. So if you oppose it, you're a liberal.
If we're not,
Blagogan Daryu's editorial staff has extremely anti Solzhenitsyn views. For example, they believe he was a traitor to Russia.
Really?
Oh yeah, wow. He should have been executed. That because their view is the Soviet state was essentially Russia. There's no difference, and that the collapse of the Soviet Union was bad. Now, it's not like saying, well, the Soviet Union should have just been turned back into the Russian Empire, because you can argue the Soviet Union was the Russian Empire that had been taken over by Marxists and then destroyed.
Yeah.
All right. In terms of territorial integrity, I suppose you can say that. All right.
It's important to note that these are voices in the Moscow Patriarchate right now.
I mean, if you go to the link, it does have this a roundtable discussion they're talking about.
Oh boy. And then on top of that, I mean, this is also part of the reason why, again, Father Daniel Siasev is not recognized as a martyr, because there's still the MP, as often referred to as the last arm of the Soviet state. Basically, its apparatus has not changed fundamentally, and we're not going to see that change anytime soon. As I said, there are dozens of true Orthodox bishops in Russia, including those in communion with our synod, and people know about it.
It's also important to point out, because people misunderstand this, when we criticize like Sergius and these others, this is not trying to say that we are like saints or something like that.
No,
right?
Or that they're bad people. No, they're heretics. There's a difference.
Yes,
they could also be bad people, but the point is,
yes, I understand. And the point is that if someone says, "Well, if you were tortured, you might have signed the document too." Well, I don't know if Sergius was physically tortured. I don't know that for a fact. But what about the millions of other people who simply did not go with it and they were tortured and died as martyrs? Yeah. What does that say about? Is it acceptable to join with Marxist, atheist, Bolshevik power, or not to? Are they just two different acceptable options down the right path? Because that's essentially, you can simply say, well, why not just simply say you can sympathize on a human level with a man under persecution, but you cannot justify his decisions.
Well, that's right.
And that's simple. That's just all you should. That's the most you should say. I mean, if I was tortured and I signed some document, pledging leadership to Biden or something like that, what I would say is I would want people to publicly condemn me. I would not want anybody to justify anything I said or did. If I survived long enough, I would never try to justify my decision. I just say I gave in when I shouldn't have.
Well, I think it was best said by St. Philaret of New York in his first sorrowful epistle. He said, "We can pity an unfortunate old man, but we cannot recognize him as the head of the Russian Church, of which we regard ourselves an inseparable part."
Yes.
Both to Patriarch Alexis and his collaborators, the sanctions of the 30th Apostolic Canon and Canon 3 of the 7th Ecumenical Synod can be doubly applied. If any bishop, making use of the secular powers, shall by their means obtain jurisdiction over any church, he shall be deposed and also excommunicated, together with all who remain in communion with him.
I think it's important not to interpret this as some sort of boasting in a prideful sense about like attacking somebody, like or something like that. That's not what it is.
It's very sad, but
because on the other hand, I can say, well, look, we have these new martyrs who they went down, and remember, you have figures like Father Boris. I mean, they went down in earthly sense, but went up in the true sense to heaven. But you have figures like Father Boris Talon, we've talked about, and he was one of the dissidents who got put in the Soviet mental asylum and essentially tortured to death. The other was Father Dmitry Dudko, who they essentially broke him with a combination of torture and
And the mental institutions and
yeah, exactly. And Father Boris simply he wouldn't give in, and he just died under this, Soviet mental asylum. And anyway, so Father Boris Talentov, you can wait. He was a member of the Moscow Patriarchate. His point in his sort of samizdat publications, I think they were, was that what made Sergius's decision and his allies so terrible was that despite everything that had been done against the Russian Church up to that point, the deaths, the killings, it was still standing. All right. And the Bolshevik government, as strange as it is made for us to think about it in the secular terms, was still scared of the Russian Church. All right. Because there's a reason they just didn't arrest every single bishop and just kill everybody immediately. All right. Because they could have. Why do they have to piecemeal this out from 1927 to 1937 after they got surged? Because at that point, as Father Boris Talentov observes, he says the church, before this, the church was simply on the verge, actually, of victory. All right, by its almost, I'm not sure how, but the implication was that it was successfully resisting kind of Bolshevik pressure, and its status in the eyes of the common person had gone up.
Yeah,
so even before it was higher in many ways than before the revolution. All right, because people saw the church, saw people who were saints were being killed because they would not submit to it, to the beast. All right, and Father Boris's point is the betrayal of Sergius and his allies was that they destroyed this. That was sort of what the Soviets realized they had to do. They had to get somebody in leadership position, or at least a nominal headship of some sort, to collaborate and to formally repudiate them. Because Sergius simply would condemn everybody as schismatics who did not commemorate him or agree with his policy. All right?
Yeah.
That way the Soviets could say, well, you're not being shot because of religious reasons. You're being shot because you're
a revolutionary.
Yeah, you are and of course, remember one of the names for the True Orthodox Church in the 30s that the sort of NKVD gave to it was something like the Old Monarchist Counter-Revolutionary League or something like that. True Orthodox Christians, what have you. I don't know if that was. I don't think we ever called ourselves that, but that was what they claimed, and they claimed that.
They also called them Tikhonites and Josephites.
Yeah, well, and you can find these like pictures. Little articles from the 30s, 40s, even up to the 50s, supposedly showing like this graph of different leadership. I don't know if you've ever seen them. Supposedly the True Orthodox Church had this massive underground network.
Yeah, they did,
and we were prepared at any moment to overthrow the Soviet government and then take over and reinstitute a reactionary monarchy that would kill all the Bolsheviks. Which might not have been a bad idea if that had happened.
That might have actually worked out well for us.
But if anybody had such a plan, it never went beyond the discussion.
It was ultimately damaged by the creation of the Moscow Patriarchate.
Because that legitimized the Soviet state, at least in the minds of many people, and also World War II, where Stalin essentially they tried to paint anybody who opposed the Soviet government as just the enemies of Russia. I mean, the enemies of Russia controlled the country.
Yeah.
At that point, the people in control in Moscow were not even Russians in many cases.
No,
Stalin wasn't. They were either Jews or Georgians or various other nationalities who just basically despised Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and even the other groups. But that's the history. I think the other point is, remember, Russians, just like Americans, are still subject to the the World War II and post-World War II sort of revision
propaganda.
So they can't come. It's very difficult for people to come to some sort of neutral, at least a fair understanding. I mean, you could argue that the Germans came in and eventually they had too heavy-handed a policy, and it led to there was Koch, who was in charge of parts of Ukraine, who alienated people there. All right, and that this had a reaction, and maybe there were Polish or Ukrainian volunteers who committed massacres, and it was just this big mess. All right.
Yeah.
I think that you can make that argument in that, the Germans didn't really understand the situation as it existed completely in the Soviet Union. And that was one of the reasons they weren't able to take advantage of the situation and such. And I mean, honestly, if let's say, I don't know if it's true or not, because obviously people question the veracity of these claims of the Ostplan, because a lot of it's simply been fabricated. But if let's say the Germans had this plan where they were going to divide Russia up into like 12 different areas, and there was going to be no czar allowed, and they were going to have like a German occupation government, it could be that maybe God simply said, I'm not going to allow them to win. He said God, I'm speaking in anthropomorphic terms, because why, that's just simply the way divine providence works. All right.
Yeah.
It doesn't justify, I mean, for example, divine providence, God's providence allows sometimes evil figures to win, but that doesn't mean God is justifying the evil figures. If like a murderer breaks into your house and kills you, murders you, like murders like a family member or whatever, it's evil, obviously a sin. God allows it. All right. And that he didn't stop it. All right, but he can still bring good out of that evil. All right.
Right.
And those aspects of divine providence we oftentimes don't understand. We have to sort of decipher them through prayer and study of how things turn out in history and such. But my point is that still doesn't justify things like Stalin.
No.
Right. And it still doesn't justify how the actions of any anti-Christian authority, whether in America or in Russia. So.
No, absolutely true. Theodore points out that reminds me of the situation that I. M. Andreev writes about, those priests who came to the MP and smashed their heads from frustrations and pulled their hair out due to their burning conscience because they felt like they betrayed Christ. Unfortunately, that's really what it was. It was a massive betrayal. And we're living in the aftermath of that. And to some degree, we really are still crawling out of the hole caused by World War II. And
I mean, there were problems before that, obviously.
Yeah. And then let me see here. Slingblade says Coke was never persecuted for real after World War II. Makes you think. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't necessarily know about that.
But in any case,
maybe, who knows? There was always these accusations that some of these people, like Bormann and maybe Koch and others, had sort of like sabotage things or work behind the scenes for the Soviets.
Possible.
And they did that in order to like sabotage. I mean, for example, if you ever study like World War II history, that like Admiral Canaris, I believe, who was the head of the Abwehr, the German intelligence agency, turned out to have been a British spy.
Oh, right? Wow.
So essentially, the Allies and the Soviets probably had heavily penetrated various areas of the German government and were behind the scenes sabotaging things. I mean, that doesn't mean the German government didn't have its own problems. Anybody who studies the history realizes that even though you have people who were professing Christians within like the various like Nazi party or what have you, there were a lot of people like Rosenberg and others who did not like Christianity. Yeah, that is just simply it's false to pretend otherwise.
Right.
If you read figures like Leon de Grelle, who was the head of the SS Charlemagne division, he was a Roman Catholic and a Rexist. But he was honest in his book Hitler for 1,000 Years, where he said that Hitler was not a Christian in any meaningful sense. He wasn't necessarily hostile to him, but that Hitler simply would, whoever was his advisor at the time, if whatever they said, if they could just influence him long enough, they could provoke some sort of a reaction on his part. All right. So you have to realize.
Look at.
So anyway, so that's important to realize. But now we're living in that aftermath.
Somebody said, why the true Orthodox are in error? Did St. Mark of Ephesus break off from World Orthodoxy and start his own jurisdiction? Of course not. True Orthodox need to be mature and in communion with World Orthodoxy. In reality, I don't think you really understood the history with St. Mark of Ephesus. If you did, you would have realized he did tell everyone to break communion with the innovating parties. The Unionists controlled Constantinople until the fall of the city. And when the city fell, immediately Patriarch Gennadius Scholarios was promoted by Mehmet II because he was anti-unionist.
Yes, and St. Mark of Ephesus also stated that nobody who was in communion with the Patriarch was to be at his funeral.
So this legendary... Learn your history before you start preaching legends at us. We appreciate it. If you have more comments, you have about 2 minutes. But otherwise, that's not a good argument at all. I'm sorry. But in any case, so yeah, we're going on the 2.5 hour mark here. So I think I'm going to cut it off at 10:45
Yep.
unless we get another comment.
Yep.
But before we go on, I want to, of course, as always, thank everybody who came in, who commented, who had questions, who had even comments we disagree with, because they help to reveal the truth. And so, once again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been supporting us, and who's been working with us, and asking questions, learning more. Those who want to join the church, etc. I'm just, as always, I'm just going to say, since 2004, NFTU has been reporting on events related to true orthodoxy, as well as underreported events relating the greatest heresy of our age, ecumenism. There's a question. Have you ever considered having Matthew Raphael Johnson on? Yeah, I don't think he'd want to come on.
Well, he did do an interesting program on this whole Stalin and the church issue.
Yeah, but I just feel like there may be
yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's no problem. But I'm just saying that he covered very much the same issue, and I think he pointed out how absurd this stuff is about claiming that Stalin was part of the church.
Yeah, he's right there. We wouldn't disagree with him. We just did a show basically pointing out how insane that is.
But that's something I've been seeing for years. Because I followed Blagagon.ru for a long time.
Yeah, I had never seen that site before, which is actually terrifying.
I mean, they're also the ones that claim that if you, if let's say like a bishop or priest if a bishop allows a priest to omit like one of the, I'm not just defending this, by the way, like to omit the dismissal of the catechumens or like one of the litanies and such. Which is the way the Greek Church has done liturgy in many ways since 1888. Not all of the Greek Church, by the way, but the Fanon.
Right.
That there is no liturgy. It simply doesn't happen. There's nothing transpires. It's invalid. Because their view is that the Tivicon has to be followed exactly in all specific details. Otherwise, there is no liturgy. All right, so that's 2:30, right? Okay.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you again for listening. And when we began this page, we never thought we'd be in the middle of a global war for the salvation of souls, but things never work out the way we planned. So we're going full time to expose ecumenical heresy where it can be found, help Orthodox Christians find their way home, and do our part to stop the globalists from fulfilling their plans of one world government, the religion of Antichrist. But today we need your help. Subscribe and support us at nftu.net and on Subscribestar or on Odyssey. Keep watching. We're just getting started. Vladika bless.
The Lord bless.
Okay, and have a good night, everyone, and thank you.
Benedicite.